Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, October 15th, one of our regularly scheduled council meetings. As we call the meeting to order, we just like to acknowledge that the lands on which we gather are the traditional territories of the Coast and Straits Salish people. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen people known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and how their connections to these lands and the adjoining waters continue to this day. Our first official order of business here is approval of the agenda. Moved and seconded. Thank you. There's a couple of minor changes that happened. If anybody looked at the agenda more than about 6 hours ago, there's a couple of sort of minor pieces, but nothing significant. With that, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Then we have adoption of the minutes of the September 23rd council meeting. Again, there's a couple minor changes to those minutes already included, so make sure you're talking to the right ones. Moved and seconded. Are there any additional changes, corrections, or amendments to those minutes? Not seeing. Did I see that moved and seconded? Yes. Okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. Well, I have a number of remarks. It's been a while since we've met. I just want to first off welcome Crystal Anderson, our new Deputy Director of Corporate Services, who's joining us here this evening. So welcome. I think this is your second week here. Yes. So nice to have you in the room. This time has been quite busy. Appreciate to all the members of council and staff who attended both the local Day of Truth and Reconciliation at the high school put on by Reconciliation, as well as the South Island Powwow, which is hosted by our First Nation neighbors. So thank you to all who were able to attend those events. Also want to express my appreciation for, again, the 1,200 volunteers plus that helped support the Victoria Marathon. For those who don't know, it's becoming more and more of an Oak Bay event. We have on Saturday now both the kids run and the 5K run held entirely in Oak Bay, and of course the marathon spends a great deal of its time running through Oak Bay as well. So that is always an incredible event and very inspiring for people's health and fitness. I did also have the opportunity to attend a quiet ceremony honoring the 1-year anniversary of October 7th with a vigil for the remaining hostages, and that was a very moving ceremony. I also attended the Victoria Regional Transit Commission. It was really a technical workshop, not a board meeting, but just looking at, I think, very positive moves that are happening right now. If you're not aware, the BC Transit is undertaking for a number of rapid transit corridors known as Blink. So the first corridor from the West Shore into downtown is largely in place, although expanding, and there's a couple of additional corridors planned over the next couple of years to really dramatically improve transit service around the region. The Alliance to End Homelessness held their AGM, which has allowed for a new governance model to allow for some flexibility in funding models, but it really highlighted the difficulty that so many nonprofits have with unstable funding sources and how hard it is to achieve significant work achieved. I also was able to join board chairs and police leadership from Oak Bay Police, Salish Police Board, Esquimalt, and Victoria Police Board, as well as the West Shore RCMP meeting with the school district board. Looking at, so you probably may be aware that the school district board received a ministerial order compelling them to undertake a safety plan for their schools by November 15th. So we were meeting with them as a body to help offer services and support and expertise to them in that work. So we're certainly from the policing standpoint, the inclusion of some form of school liaison officer or in school police presence is recommended, but ultimately it's going to be up to the school district what they bring back to the minister for consideration. I also just want to acknowledge some long service pieces here. One, the CRD, Colin Plant, has been chair there for 6 years, has done a very respectable job over the time that he's been there. He's not standing again, so there's a little thank you ceremony at the last board meeting for his time on as board chair, but I just want to, at this table as well, recognize his service as board chair. It's a lot of work, and he's done a great job, and so certainly wish him all the success in his future ambitions. And also we had long service awards here in Oak Bay, so once a year, was something we knew that we started last year. We recognize people who have 10 years or more of service, so every 10, 15, 20 years. We had 11 recipients of a long service award that totaled over 230 years of cumulative service in Oak Bay. So we rely quite heavily on that corporate knowledge and expertise from our staff, and so it was great to actually have a chance to kind of just celebrate some of those pieces of our staff. That concludes my comments, and move forward with public comment and question period. I see a number of familiar faces, but there are certainly some unfamiliar faces. So if you're here tonight to speak to items that are on the agenda, then we would invite you to speak to those items at the time of that item on the agenda. However, if you're just here, if you have any other issues, we have this open period because we do welcome public comment on anything related to Oak Bay. So if you're here to speak to us about any items of general interest to Oak Bay, you're more than welcome to come forward at this time. So again, if you're here to speak to something on the agenda, then we'll have time for that, for any of the items that, of course, allow for public input. But if you're something here, anybody either online or in person wishes to talk to us about matters that aren't on the agenda, then you're more than welcome to come forward at this time. Sometimes we have a lot, sometimes we have none. I think it looks like we have one of those none evenings. But I just don't want this to be intimidating, so if anybody just wishes to come forward, yeah, please come forward. You've been here before, so you can help demonstrate the process, which is to have a seat and state your name and the municipality of residence. You don't have to give your address, your full name, municipality of residence, then you have up to 3 minutes. And yeah, just push the button. I don't think it's quite on. Oh. The back button might not be on there. There. Perfect.
Kathleen Matthews. I live at Windsor Park.
Yes.
So I'm a resident of Oak Bay for 33 years. I don't know if it's relevant for this meeting or not, but I've been meaning to ask questions about your cycling plan, and particularly curious as to why you haven't emphasized and prioritized Beach Drive. I cross Beach Drive all the time just to get to Turkey Head, walk the dog, whatnot. And sometimes the bikes are coming from all over the city. It's a major bike route. And they're barreling down from Oak Bay Beach Hotel down that hill, not stopping, not paying attention to anything, sometimes 2, 3, 4 in a wide. And I'm just wondering why you didn't prioritize that as part of your cycling initiatives, because I know you're working on cycling, and I can see you're focusing on trying to get people up to UVic or not, but Beach Drive is really becoming difficult to drive in a car because of the bikes. Difficult to bike because of the cars and the bikes, because they just don't respect anybody that's not going at the speed they're going. And I would just like to raise that and understand. And I don't know if you want to have a conversation now, or just I'll bring it to your attention and go sit down.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews. We don't usually have a conversation, but that's exactly the kind of item that is appropriate to bring at this point of the meeting. I don't have a specific answer for you as to the why. Generally speaking, the prioritization of cycling infrastructure has focused on commuting support, so getting kids to and from school or people to and from work. That has been the top priority in terms of our cycling infrastructure. And I will say, I think Beach Drive is in many ways difficult to contain within bike lanes and things of that nature. It is a route used by tour buses, cars, and bicycles in large quantities, and so it's going to be a complicated direction over time. But primarily, the driver at this point was to maximize safety for commuting as a first step.
I commuted to UVic for 33 years, and I bicycled I was a fair weather biker, but I was bicycling on Beach Drive as the main way to get there, and then I would go up through the uplands. So I think it is a commuter route as well for many people in South Oak Bay to get where they need to go. So anyway, just if you could pay attention to that or do something, I think
Sure.
It's really a high priority.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews. And I did the same thing. I rode along Beach Drive and then through the uplands to get to UVic when I was going there as well. It's a good route. Anybody else wish to speak to council on any other matters of not on the agenda but of interest to council or to the district? Okay. Oh, okay. One more. Can you turn the microphone on, please? So, Mr. Newell, can you just put the microphone on and just say that again for the record?
I live on Goldsmith Street. I just noticed that I often drive over to Uplands Park. And when you leave the Estevan Village, going up Musgrave, going north, it goes from, you're leaving it's encouraging you to go 50 kilometers an hour down that road. It says that's the speed. And also along in front of the park, when it turns right down Dorset. And to go 50 kilometers an hour down that road with a narrow road seems awfully fast for any car to go down there. And we're putting up all sorts of signs around the city going to go slower. So I think that would be a good candidate.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Newell. You're probably right, it probably is, and by default, the default speed limit on all of our side streets by provincial requirement is 50 kilometers an hour. And so that is the default unless we sign it differently. So yes, thank you. We've been still hoping that there's a pilot project that was started and then stopped to set the default for the region as 40 kilometers an hour. We would just sign the major streets as 50. That fell apart when a number of the municipalities changed direction on that one. So perhaps with the new provincial government coming in after the election, that may be considered again by the province. But in the meantime, we can certainly look. I will say if there's issues like that that relate to specific streets or aspects, you can always email engineering@oakbay.ca or just do a report through the website. And you can make a request for changes to streets, which is a delegated authority of, some of it is delegated to staff. And they'll go into a review and can bring that back to council if it requires a council approval. So there is a process there. You can actually report it. And they'll look at it from an engineering perspective about the appropriateness of the speed limits on some of the streets. That helps.
So just to the engineering department, the municipality here.
Yep, just engineering@oakbay.ca is the simplest way of doing that, or through the website.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Mr. Newell. All right. Thank you, all of you who came forward. I know it's a bit awkward sometimes to come forward and speak in this forum, so thanks for doing that. We move forward to item section 6, which is reports and memorandums. These are not subject to public input. Most things are in our procedures bylaw. These items are not. So we have up first the 2025 financial planning guidelines. Ms. LaChance, welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here to introduce the 2025 Financial Planning Guidelines Report. I'll provide just a brief introduction to the report and then can take any questions from yourself or council. Annually, the district undertakes an annual financial planning process. The process is led by council and involves all levels of staff developing work plans and providing recommendations on how to maintain service levels. New this year, this report enables staff to check in with council early in the process. This is the opportunity to set direction on the approach to financial planning and also on key assumptions. The guidelines in this report are for consideration and, if approved, will advise the organization as well as set practice on the approach to cost mitigation and the approach on use of surpluses, reserves, and debt. As the district endeavors towards sustainable service delivery in the face of economic pressures, the organization remains focused on balancing price escalation and staff capacity. Increases to service levels or new service levels are considered only if necessary to meet regulatory or legislative requirements or at council's direction. Informed by the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan, as well as asset management policy and strategy, long-term funding for asset renewal remains a top priority. Of note for council is that these guidelines are aligned with the existing suite of financial management bylaws, policies, and plans in place for the district and are listed for reference in the report. The report presents both the financial plan timeline and the financial planning guidelines for council approval. The recommendation is for council to receive the report and approve both the timeline and the guidelines. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. LaChance. Procedurally here, our usual thing, we'll take questions. After that, we'll have to entertain a motion and then debate. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to Ms. LaChance. Thank you very much for the report. There are documents that are attached to it, explained in the report, that you will be taking into consideration external conditions like that would affect our like inflation and employment statistics. So what I'm wondering is, of course not tonight, but when the financial report comes out, what kind of metrics will be used to explain why and to what extent external conditions might affect the financial plan for Oak Bay?
Go ahead, Ms. Lachance.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. That's a wonderful question because I think that at this stage, we're always looking to the external economic conditions as indication only. We're very rarely tying directly to, let's say, CPI in August. What we're looking for is those trends over time, and we're really trying to make sure our annual process, which is fairly static, incorporates current trends. When we bring the balanced financial plan forward, you would be looking for us to provide some context in terms of recent information, any changes in those assumptions from today's date, and have that explained as part of the presentation.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for that confirmation. I probably have more questions, but I will save them till the actual financial plan is before us. Also, as Ms. Lachance stated, long-term capital planning is a priority. So I will ask the question that I've been asking now for over 4 years. At what point do you anticipate that we will be able to get into long-range planning for not only the assets, but for funding and debt management?
Ms. Lachance?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Also an excellent question. I think that it's fair to say I am relatively new still. I'd like to call that for a number of months still, Chair.
You get 8 years, that's the deal.
Okay,
8 years
good.
of being new.
Good. I will say that we've already transitioned in some cases to having some long-term asset renewal. So whether that be 25-year equipment replacement when it comes to recreation and some life cycle replacement on buildings, we're already migrating in that direction. What we would look for is, as we have a council priority related to development of the comprehensive asset management plan, we would look to have that foundation in place, as well as implemented practices like enterprise asset management, as well as having the strategy and policy renewed, which is on our work plan late 2024 and into 2025. So I would like to just encourage that once we're able to develop, let's say, a greater percentage of long-term asset plans in each of the areas, that can then be compiled and used to forecast a long-term financial plan. So I forecast that depending on progress and investment into asset management, which has already been well underway with those council priorities at some point in the future with that, us finishing off those projects.
Yep. Did you wish to add something? No? Yep. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to staff. I guess my one question was just with regards to, because I've heard it brought up before, and I think it's all in our minds, the piece of generational fairness and equity as we balance out making financial planning strategies. It was mentioned price escalation and staff capacity, and of course affordability to taxpayers. I assume that there is also a lens of, as we make decisions going forward, how to balance, like especially when we're looking at our infrastructure and, you know, trying to front load more of that work, that we're also taking into consideration the generational fairness of paying for some of the things in our plan. And I just wondered if you could comment on that. Thank you.
Ms. Lachance?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Absolutely, when we're looking at debt management strategy and policy, which you may have seen in another report I have forward, that we're going to come back with some of that policy development and work with council. It's absolutely imperative to try our best to mitigate revenue over time. And we'll have significant periods of investment in capital renewal or capital new. And with that comes full life cycle costing that would then help us manage revenue over time. Debt is one tool. to be able to do that. And we have such an opportunity here with the district that we have no borrowing outstanding, and we're able to be deliberate when we issue debt as we go forward to address just that concern. It is difficult to address where that's not been done previously in some communities, and you would have heard about that throughout BC. But I think that what we have ahead of us, we have lots of opportunity to be able to make those deliberate decisions.
Good, thank you. Councillor Appleton, then Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and appreciate the content of the report. I feel like I'm maybe immediately diverting from the financial aspects, so I apologize, Ms. LaChance, if you need to redirect the question. But the report makes specific reference to base service levels, and with the understanding that base service levels staying at status quo levels, and that an adjustment to the service level would, by definition, have an effect on the budget planning process and that sort of thing. I'm just wondering at what point in the budget timeline that's laid out in this report is a review of service levels contemplated, and if there is a formal step or a formal juncture discussion point that needs to be initiated by council, is that something that we need to direct as a council, or will it come up as a matter of course through this process?
Ms. LaChance?
Yes, absolutely. You will see some reference, sorry, through you, Chair. You will see some reference within this report, although probably light to address your question fully, so I'd like the opportunity to expand. We will begin that process with a council priority check-in that's planned for December, and that's the 4-year cycle, priority setting cycle for council. We do have a check-in or a 2024 review planned for December. That's an opportunity for the organization through strategic initiatives to report on work plans, service levels, capacity, and resourcing available for council priorities. I am new, so that would be something that we could consider as we go forward if there is any changes within that previously designed process, but that's the process that's designed today.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Appleton?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate that. If I could just expand on that a little bit. Again, I'm just sort of looking to see, it hasn't been council's typical process in the past to sort of deliberately itemize service levels and those types of things and do a review of that. And so I'm gathering that's not what's contemplated in this upcoming process. But again, if there was the interest in council in doing a more detailed review of service levels with respect to the financial planning process, I'm just looking for clarity on at what point, this may be a question for the CAO potentially, at what point would we request that, or at what juncture would make the most sense to I guess, trigger that process, or sort of make it essentially give staff direction that was something that council wanted to engage in.
Ms. Williams, I mean, I can certainly see that requiring us basically getting a report back on some options of how we might address that. Is that something that, to Councillor Appleton's question, over to you?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think what I could say at this point is you will receive some service level light information during this year's deliberations. Staff have been assessing service levels at the operational level without it coming to council as a priority. Our staff have identified that a more robust opportunity might be something council's more interested in, and that's something that you could consider through the council priority process. Okay. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Green?
Through you, Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Ms. LaChance, for the report and a newer approach to budgeting in Oak Bay. You mentioned stabilizing tax rates a couple of times in the report, and this speaks to my colleagues' remarks on affordability. And I think for taxpayers in Oak Bay, one of the questions is the ability to age in place and to stay in Oak Bay. So tax rates are always on people's minds at tax time, of course. But I'm just wondering, is that something that we will be looking at on a more regular basis in terms of stabilizing tax rates and weighing those against requirements for infrastructure and other priorities? Thank you.
The chance?
Yes, thank you. That's also a great question. Um, the main focus around stabilizing revenue and the repetition that you would sense is the way that we package and develop a budget is very intentional to achieve that outcome. That we're really looking to right-size revenue, if I may say it that way, for the period at hand and for the investment cycle that we're in. The asset management priorities have clearly stated that the priority we have currently is to catch up on replacement, lower overall cost of delivery in the long run. That might not look like a decrease in cost, but it'll look like cost avoidance in the future. Stabilizing revenues looks to minimize revenue, but also to make sure that there aren't fluctuations that make it difficult for taxpayers to anticipate, save, budget, and afford. And so I think if I got all of your question through Chair to Councillor Green, at what point will we be considering that? I would suggest that we are considering it already. In terms of taking direction on tax rate setting, tax revenue and tax rates, we take that direction from Council. So that consideration would be as directed.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. I just had a couple really sort of a summary question. The 2.7% target that's in here, I can see an argument for, slightly more, slightly less. And so ultimately that's where it's fallen. I'm just not entirely clear if that's the cumulative average across all the departments. Is that sort of what's being asked? Is it per department to sort of use work to that? I'm aware, just because of things that are happening in the police world right now, for instance, there is an amazing amount of costs that are being downloaded this year into the policing things. And so while the police board hasn't received the budget yet, we know it's going to be fairly substantive. And so, I'm just curious about if the intention here is to give this direction today and for staff to go away and try and come back with a cumulative average of 2.7, or is it every department has a cap of 2.7 as part of their sort of target internal planning process? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to expand on that benchmark of 2.7%. The report speaks to that would be a target or something that we would manage against, and that's not enough information, so I appreciate the question and the opportunity to expand. The intention at setting a benchmark early in the stage, at the early stage that we are, is setting direction around a baseline of increase. And that would look like a cumulative within each of the divisions or departments when balancing some non-discretionary, such as wage contracts or contracts that already have price escalation and have already been signed, against other maybe light items that can be controlled. And so what we would look to do is to have that internal due diligence to target benchmarks, but understanding that that's in some cases, for some lines of business, not possible. In those cases, internal scrutiny would be reviewing those departments, understanding what those variances are off of the benchmark, and it's not a set target, it's intended to be an indication. And then we would look to balance the budget, and I'll call it consolidated, but it really is one budget. But we want to manage each line of business true to form. So whatever service levels are needed, what contracts are in place, each budget is costed every year.
Great, thank you for that explanation. All right, we have the report in front of us.
Move receipt.
Move receipt is an easy one. Moved and seconded. Don't usually debate receipt of the report. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And I'll move the staff recommendation.
Okay, this is the guidance be approved. Staff be directed to prepare a financial plan review based on the attached timeline. Any other discussion on that? Okay, thanks for the good questions and appreciate the piece. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Good luck with the budgeting process. Never a simple thing when you have so many variables at play. I just realized as I move on to item 6.2, the community grant funding, I did forget to mention that the 2024 questionnaire results are out. And so we had about a 50% uptick in feedback, which I guess isn't surprising when we're asking how we're doing at the same time you get your tax bill, where you expect more feedback than in the middle of winter. So it's great, and some really interesting responses, and about 150 odd pages of just very thoughtful, mostly thoughtful written comments and ideas and things that are quite specific. So definitely encourage members of the public and members of council to make sure that you have a chance to read through that. And I just want to say I see Tony Joe's in the audience here. He just dropped off some little plates that honoring Canagats from the Collector Car Festival. So now in our distant memory of warm weather, but thank you for dropping those off. Moving on to item number 6.2, our community grant funding initiatives update. We have Ms. Williams, the Chief Administrative Officer, here to introduce, and then we have the recommendations within the body here. Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a fairly brief report that's before you that just shares the status of two initiatives. The district had applied for a community-to-community grant to implement or to complete. The two initiatives identified and approved by council last year were a cultural tour to increase the understanding of the Indigenous history of Oak Bay, and that tour was held on September the 7th. And the second initiative was to develop protocol agreements with the Songhees Nation and the Esquimalt First Nation. We're here this evening because the granting deadline expires on November the 27th, 2024. And while the first initiative is complete, the second one we are underway with conversations. We're not confident we'll be able to finish it by November the 27th. And so we're seeking council's affirmation of that previous direction and an opportunity to apply for the next grant intake should additional funding be required.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? I might preamble this as well in terms of the relationship agreement. I had a positive discussion with Chief Sam last week on that, and it sounds like it's an important part that they see going forward. It's sort of considered like an MOU or a memorandum of understanding or protocol agreement. There's a number of words, but this is the one shared with us, and so I think it's I appreciate the efforts to try and fast track that if we're able to. So thank you. Questions from members of council to staff on this? Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the report and the reminder of what we had applied for previously, and are still continuing to work on. It wasn't really clear to me, particularly with the relationship agreement, what the goals or the content of the relationship agreement would be. And I guess what I'm not understanding is it's to establish or allow for collaborative work, and I'm just wondering how collaborative work presently is impeded or obstructed by not having a documented agreement.
Ms. Williams.
Thank you, through Your Worship, to Councillor Patterson and the rest of council. I don't think I would characterize it as collaborative work being impeded by not having a protocol. More so, a protocol agreement will provide us the parameters under which we can engage. And if everybody has agreed in advance on how we are going to engage or work together on certain aspects of our individual businesses, it just makes for a much smoother process, and people feel that their needs have been met if the protocol is being followed.
Anything else, Councillor Patterson?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and through you also to staff. So then will this agreement, will it support or provide a framework for shared prosperity or equity, or does that go beyond what the intent of this relationship agreement is?
Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. At this point, we haven't presupposed to know what the relationship agreement will include. The approach is to come together with our nation neighbors and to talk about what's important in each area. And so we may find that a communication protocol is important to some, perhaps a procurement protocol. I mean, there's so many things that you could add as protocol agreements, and some of them may be procurement protocols that have a heavier weighting for a First Nation business or things of that nature. But at this point, I really don't know what the protocols will be until the nations and the districts through council has identified what are those important pieces. I'm hoping that's helpful.
And I may just, if it helps at all, in my observations of like the memorandums of understanding that are being worked through the CRD with various First Nations partners, they tend to be very high level at the beginning, sort of laying out what are the aspects that could be talked about, and then diving down into each of those other individual pieces over time, often driven by specific projects and so forth. So I don't imagine for this amount of money in this time frame that we're going to be getting a comprehensive anything, but it creates an agreement that sort of lays out where at least the parameters of where people expect to be contacted, how they expect to be contacted, and what areas of interest are for the mutual parties. But that being said, I think ultimately that will come. They're all a bit different, as I understand. So, anything else? Yep. Any other questions from members of council? Oh, okay. Councillor Green. Sorry.
Yeah, just a couple of questions for me. One is, and I think I understand that it's not clear to, we're too early in the process to be able to identify, but I'm just wondering what elements, what tangibles will be ultimately looked at, and how our council will be involved in the process. Because I think there should be some council presence as well, and I'm not sure what we want to do about that. And then understanding the role of our community as well, and how can that be helped along. So I'm just not certain about how this is going to look or how it's implemented right now. Thank you.
Sure. Ms. Williams, in terms of the, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think everyone is in the early stages of preparing these agreements right now with respect to Songhees, Esquimalt, and Oak Bay. And the approach that's been presented is that it will be a staff team that will gather to actually craft the protocol agreements based on issues that have been identified by the respective councils. So if a council identifies employment issues as important and something they want to collaborate on, that will be brought to the table. We'll work on some potential language, and then we respectively bring that back to our councils for endorsement. And of course, council will have input into what types of protocol agreements council determines that the district may need.
Councillor Green, anything else?
No, I'll wait for some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor.
Just a follow-up to that, through you, Mayor. When you say staff, do you mean staff from the nations and from Oak Bay together forming this?
My apologies. I appreciate people online couldn't see me nod. Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. Yes, it will be a rapid team, and the Songhees Nation has so far developed the approach that we're going to be using, and it will be I think 2 to 3 staff representatives from the Songhees Nation and Oak Bay and the Esquimalt as well.
And just for clarification on the last part of that question, because I think I heard you say it. I mean, this is I think it has to be, because it's basically every other table, but those things are worked on at the staff level to come up with some frameworks, and those are brought back to council for consideration and direction and ultimately approval. Is that?
Absolutely, Your Worship. This is an agreement between our respective organizations, so something that council will have to provide input, guidance, and make decisions on.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Smart. Questions?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Ms. Williams, just to clarify then, hearing the process, will staff be bringing what they will likely discuss with the First Nations to council before that discussion, or will council simply be receiving what staff has coordinated afterwards? Thank you.
Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to council. I think it may be an organic process. There may be some of each of those as we sit at a table and issues are raised and perhaps hammered out to a degree that they can be brought back. They may be brought back in that format. And in other cases, council may be sitting with Oak Bay staff here and discussing what they would like discussed at that table. So I think you're going to get a bit of both.
Please continue, Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Ms. Williams, if it was of interest to council to have a discussion prior to sort of first engagement, would that be direction that staff would want to receive today, and would they want a formal motion for that?
Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that's entirely up to council's prerogative to make that decision. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Patterson for a second time?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Obviously, there would be some allowance of time for this. I know normally we do project backgrounders when we're undertaking projects. So I'm just wondering, Mayor, through you to staff, if we could have some indication of the resourcing, how this would be resourced, because I know we have heard a lot about the staff, being understaffed and overtasked right now. And so I'd like to have some confidence that that the resources are have been taken into consideration, so that if we're extending the grant again, so I don't, how many times do we extend without completing a project?
Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to council. When the initiatives were brought forward last year as a part of a grant application, staff had ensured that the work was put into the work plans. When that work wasn't completed, it wasn't that we weren't engaging with people and having conversations and the time wasn't used, but it is something we will roll into next year. It's a fairly minimal amount of time. We anticipate probably 4 to 6 2-hour meetings for staff to come together. So it's not something that's going to be outside of our allowance for working on council resolutions in our work plans.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Mayor. And just a quick question. It's more about background information for these community-to-community agreements for Ms. Williams. Can you just remind me, or maybe inform me for the first time, how long have UBCM been handing out, well, not handing out, but giving these grants to communities under application?
Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm actually going to defer to Ms. Morton, who is online and probably has that information. I don't have it at my fingertips.
Welcome to the meeting, Ms. Morden.
Thank you, Your Worship. Pardon me. The community-to-community forum, that is a really great question. It's definitely been in place for over 10 years, possibly back as far as around 2005, I believe.
Thank you. And so that's quite a while. So it's just a follow-up in terms of a particular, what are we calling this? Relationship agreement. Would we be working, I guess this is for Ms. Williams, I mean, every community has different issues. It depends who the partners are at the table, but there must be lots of examples of how these might unfold, and to what extent will that inform the process for all the parties to the agreement?
Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to council. Certainly looking at what's been successful in other communities is a part of the work we will undertake. And certainly if we have issues that have been identified by the partners that are similar to what we have in other communities, we won't reinvent the wheel. We will use that information if it works for the particular partners here.
Thank you. That's everything.
Thank you. I maybe have just because I've actually seen this play out a few times now, it may just be helpful to understand, as I read the wording here and hearing the answers from Ms. Williams, the resolution here is, approving funding and directing staff to take part in this work. I think it's really important that council make that decision, so that's why it's here. It theoretically could be done at a staff level, but I think it's important for us as a council to, if this is important work, it should be coming here as one of our priorities to consider our reconciliation. but I've heard, and where it's happened at every other table has been this exact sort of direction. We think this is important to develop these kind of protocol agreements. Staff, please go work with the First Nations to start working on this and bring back, information and drafts for, for the board or the council to consider. So in what I've seen from at the CRD and what I understand from the work that happened at Salish with their MOU process, this is very similar. So to start the process and have it come back and forth. So I just think for comfort level, what I've heard from Ms. Williams there is this is sort of the initial kickoff of that sort of at a political level. Do we actually want to direct staff time and resources to this work at this time? If not, obviously, then that's can be the direction of council. So that might help create some context around it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Are you taking comments now?
I think we can have a motion to receive the report, and then we can probably make motions, and we can have comments on the motions to speak to that.
I'll move to receive.
Yeah, moved and seconded. We don't usually debate receipt of the report, so I'll take that. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the report, and especially the effort, the initiative. What I'm struggling with, though, is that this is community to community, and I don't believe that we've had those conversations in our own community that will inform this work. I'm concerned about that because I'm not sure I would know what to actually identify as elements or tangibles on behalf of Oak Bay until we have those community conversations here at the sort of grassroots level. And so I think it's really important that this council is involved as well. And I understand this is the high level beginning, but I really think we need to sustain an active role in this and also look to our community for guidance. And there are organizations at that community level that can help us do that. We do not, I think, as a council, have the capacity to do that ourselves. But I think it's really important that we start somewhere with conversations at our own community level. The advantage of the Indigenous communities that we're working with is that they're small, and it's much easier to engage. For us as a community of almost 18,000 people, it's much more challenging to engage. So I think an engagement model is going to be really important, an engagement model going forward. So that's my concern. I know that we have Reconciliation Oak Bay Network as one engagement piece that could perhaps assist us. And there are other avenues as well. I know the University of Victoria and so on. So I'm just wanting to make sure that we fully understand and can reflect some of the aspirations of our own community, and that's what I'm struggling with a little bit. But I understand it's important to launch this as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No motion made. There is something with wanting to make a motion. Maybe simplest to move the piece as laid out here, and if there's some decision to add some amendments to that in terms of some direction of a process, we could do that. But
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Moved and seconded. And again, like I said, we can, if there's some desire here to amend this at this point to give some clearer direction on how and if we wish to have any other aspects of the consultation with council or the public, that could be included, or we could leave that till that for that to come back as part of the first feedback loop from staff. Mover and seconder, wish to motivate it all? Okay, Councillor Smart, sorry, Councillor Appleton.
Just very briefly, Your Worship, just speaking to the motion, I'm satisfied with the level of granularity that's presented at this stage of the game, just purely because again, as per some previous comments on this, I wouldn't presuppose the nature of the topics that would be included in a memorandum of understanding or the priority topics that our First Nations neighbors may wish to discuss. So I think that there will probably be significant opportunities for involvement of council talking about individual components that will play out of this agreement. I see this more as the framework to have the conversation, and then once those individual topics come before council, obviously it's a different type level of discussion, but I see this as the initial framework to guide how that communication happens. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very much in favor of moving forward with an agreement, and I don't mean to nitpick the words, but I'm in hearing the explanation from staff around how it will proceed. I'm very comfortable with what I'm hearing from staff, but when I read the first recommendation, It doesn't quite align with that for me, and I just don't want the piece to be lost about either is it council to council or staff to staff, and particularly that our council gets an opportunity to explain how we would like to see this moving forward before something is established and we're in an awkward situation of not being on board with the direction that is being undertaken. So I guess I have two possible suggestions for amendments, but I'd like to hear what other people around the table have to say. But one would be if this first recommendation states that staff work with the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, and it doesn't specifically say staff, that we should also add in and the District of Oak Bay Council, that we're part of that. So it could simply be an amendment like that, or we could add another amendment on that says, and staff undertake a conversation with council around approaches to a relationship agreement prior to staff consultation. So there's a couple different approaches I think we could take there. I'm just curious what other feedback is around the table. I just don't want our involvement piece to get left too late in the process.
Sure, thank you. And, you know, if anybody's able to make a motion, I might suggest, based on what you said there, you could probably put something along the lines of after Esquimalt First Nations, comma, in consultation with Oak Bay Council, comma, to develop a relationship agreement. And that might be sufficient for it to be, you know, be clear that we expect it to come back to this table. I don't think there's any lack of clarity, given what's been said in the meeting, but I appreciate sometimes it's good to have that in the motions. Then go ahead, Councillor Green, on the motion that's on the floor.
Yeah, I would support that. I think it's a really important point. I think what I'm struggling with as well, we have not discussed this as a council, really, in any sort of meaningful way. And I understand there's a deadline for grant applications and so on, but it would be really opportunistic to have a discussion about this, because it has long-term both operational and political implications for both communities. So it's a sensitive topic, I think, and certainly worth the time and effort. So I would like, as soon as possible, to at least have a conversation around our table about what this means in consultation with staff, you know, with Ms. Morden and Ms. Williams. I think we need that informal conversation as well. And then looking to planning and engagement process with our own community, because I think that's a key element as well.
So we have a motion on the floor. Any other discussion on the motion? Councillor Patterson, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and I thank Councillor Smart for her comments there. I think it is important to have council involved. As I look at the C2C forum and or agreement topics, certainly if it was just within the one category of reconciliation and relationship building, which is I think where we started with this, then it makes sense to proceed kind of as presented. But if once you get into some of the other topics, they become more involved. And so I would certainly want to know that if it branches out into that range of topics, that council has an opportunity to have dialogue with the people from our staff who are working on this, to have the opportunity to discuss it here at council prior to them going forward with that. So I think adding in and, you know, with add council would be have a strong advantage.
Back to you, Councillor Smart. Like I said, my suggestion might just be after Esquimalt First Nations, say, comment in consultation with Oak Bay Council.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I will move that amendment.
Moved and seconded. So this is staff work with Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, comma, in consultation with Oak Bay Council, comma, to develop a relationship agreement, etc. Oh, basically formalizing, I think, Ms. Williams, what you said here at this table, that discussion will come back to this table at. So, okay. So now we're dealing with any discussion on the amendment. I'm not seeing any, so we'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. So we now have the motion here as amended. Any other discussion on the motion? Thank you. I just want to express my appreciation to staff. I think when, part of this is being nimble, and so when our First Nations partners ask us for something, it's nice to be able to move as quickly as possible. And so I appreciate this coming to the first Available Council meeting to have this direction and have that sort of advance forward with the blessing of council. I think it strengthens the position of our staff to have this in a public meeting and have it clear that we're supportive of this work being done. So thank you for that. Not seeing any other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 7.1. This section is subject to public input, so certainly welcome public input. Procedurally here, if anybody's here to talk about that, we'll have a staff overview, questions of council, opportunity for public input, back to this table for motions and direction. So, Ms. LaChance, please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. As I start with just a brief introduction of this report. This report is intended to seek Council's approval for the treatment of the 2022 and 2023 year-end surpluses. On June 26, 2023, Council approved amendments to the reserve and surplus policy to incorporate decision guidance for allocation of annual surpluses. Excuse me, should they arise. The policy is attached in Appendix A. In preparation for the upcoming financial planning cycle, staff seek to update reserve balances before year-end and before the 2025-2029 financial plan can be balanced for council deliberations. Should council wish to identify other initiatives to be funded, the upcoming council priority check-in planned for December will be another opportunity to consider funding allocation. The recommendation is to allocate $1 million of the surplus to the Infrastructure Renewal Reserve, leaving $1.2 million in unappropriated surplus in the general and sewer funds. Background on past council deliberations is included in the report, as is the supporting rationale for the recommendation. Happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much for that. This is not specifically allocating things to projects, but really kind of general broad strokes of that allocating the surplus into the various piles, some usable and some more dedicated to infrastructure renewal. Are there any questions for staff on this? Yeah, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I'm just seeking to understand sort of the decision matrix to go to the infrastructure renewal reserve. I may be getting this wrong, but as I read Section 6 of the policy, it essentially specifies that sort of a go no go point or a decision point is whether or not the financial stability reserve is at $500,000 or more, and if it is, then you can allocate to other reserves listed there. I don't read that, and I may get this wrong, but I don't read that as and right now the financial stability reserve is at $1 million. I don't read that as that if the financial stability reserve is over $500,000, that you would automatically move on to a different type of allocation. Like, I guess in the specific sense, we would still be keeping with policy if theoretically we decided to allocate an additional $1 million to the financial stability reserve rather than the infrastructure reserve. Like, it's not mandated that that's sort of a go, no go point. So if I understand that correctly, council could also decide to put $1 million into the financial stability reserve rather than the infrastructure reserve, if I understand that.
Ms. LaChance?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair, to Councillor Appleton. That's correct. So it intends to seek, the language intends to set the minimum that we would like to see in that reserve. That balance can be increased. You'll also see later on in that same section reference to up to $2 million. And that would be the range with which you would be looking to allocate specified monies for that purpose.
Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate the answer. I guess then my follow-up question would be, because I don't see it detailed in the report, or maybe I missed it, to say that the recommendation has been to allocate an additional $1 million to the infrastructure renewal reserve, which, as I understand it, is at $23 million with approved spending at $22 million. So we have a reserve that has enough capacity to accommodate existing spending. Was there sort of a decision point to say, it would be preferable to allocate additional money to the infrastructure renewal reserve rather than the financial stability reserve in this case.
Mr. Shantz?
Yes, so the policy intends to provide guidance. There is the decision tree and qualitative guidance to move through each of those decision points. In doing so, the greatest need in terms of balancing out through the 5-year was identified in the infrastructure renewal reserve. The other reserves very much could be directed by council to contribute to them. The idea of the range and the current balance in the financial stability reserve already being at $1 million set in motion the recommendation from staff to move on to the other further on criteria.
That's sufficient, Councillor Appleton?
Just one follow-up here, Your Worship. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So then it would, then if I understand that correctly, it then follows, and I can understand why this might be the case. Essentially, we essentially believe that over time, the additional infrastructure renewal reserve will be necessary given the cost of infrastructure renewal. And I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you an engineering-related question, but certainly what council has seen in terms of project costs and escalating costs in that regard are probably the significant driver for wanting an additional $1 million in that reserve, if I might conjecture that.
Okay. Thank you. Through you, Chair. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Appleton. Well said. I would agree with the rationale behind the recommendation from staff. Sorry about my throat. My son's fighting a cold, so I feel like it's... I've had lots of halls. It's not working.
Coming through loud and clear. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any other questions before I go to members of the public? Oh, sorry, Councillor Watson and then Smart.
Yeah, just a budget financial plan and budget finalization question, and it's just about the timing of the 2022 allocation. Of 2023 is only really just passed, but would we normally be in a situation where we were finalizing 2022 in the fall of 2024?
Mr. Shantz?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The results are finalized each year when we receive the audited financial statements. The surplus, if unallocated through council direction within the policy guidance, it remains in an unappropriated surplus position, either in the general, water, or sewer fund. That is the case with the 2022 surplus. That surplus came with staff recommendation, as outlined in the report in September of 2023. It was deferred, I can only assume, as part of the financial planning process, and then later was resurfaced to council as part of the 2023 audited. And so no, we wouldn't be in the position typically to be allocating multiple years of surplus. In this case, as we prepare for the 2025 financial planning, we are seeking to appropriate or unappropriate the 2022 and 2023 surpluses.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor. My question is with regards to reserve funds and just to a little bit tangentially related, but I just think an opportune time to bring it up with our discussion. I'm just wondering, when is the appropriate time in the year to potentially talk about reserve funds in general, and with the potential and to look at, is there a new reserve fund that is needed in that sort of scope of conversation? And I bring this up specifically because when we last looked at this surplus policy, there was some discussion around the table about, oh, could we also do a more fine-grained look at, like, do we want, if we have even excess funds, to go to the climate fund or the active transportation fund or this fund? And a lot of the funds, whether they be by law restricted or restricted due to history of how that fund exists, were not funds that we wanted to necessarily tie money into. And so I'm just wondering if something like this council in our upcoming council priority process decides we really want to invest further in climate, and we want a climate reserve fund that isn't tied down to any of these historic constraints, is that something that council can discuss, and when would that discussion best happen?
Mr. Schultz?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I would agree that the best timing for that is the upcoming council priority check-in. Allocation of monies to reserve, whether one time or from taxation, is really just that. It's only funding. The process really should start with where do you want that money to go. Creating a reserve is only a mechanism to store the funds over time, and so we can take that direction from council. The infrastructure renewal reserve was just that, direction from council to establish a separate reserve fund, not by bylaw, but by direction, and that's in place today as a result of that historical direction.
Mr. Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I wasn't going to raise it, but I will since it directly relates to the last commentary. I actually voted against the reserve and surplus policy that was approved by council because it did not contain mechanisms for identifying minimum and maximum ceilings for each of the reserve funds. So based on these discussions and the fact that we might be looking at longer term fund planning and debt management, is that something that we could also potentially revisit at priorities then?
Schultz?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. As you asked that question, I think I left some of Councillor Smart's question unanswered. There is also the question that was raised around when do we review the reserves in place, and what type of evaluation should we perform over those reserves. And often you'll hear it referred to as financial health of the reserves. And we do look for financial health indicators to help us determine that and evaluate that. Within this report, of course, being new, wanting to take my own opportunity to review, I have highlighted that as part of my work plan for 2025 to review the reserve policy in conjunction with debt management policy, which I think would be a nice opportunity to address before we start issuing debt as part of the 5-year plan.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't see other questions from this table, so if anybody from the public wishes to talk to council, you can ask questions or make comments on item 7.1, the surplus allocation. We will take those public input at this time, either online or in person. I see mostly staff online at this point, so probably not in, online. Anybody in the building here wish to talk to us about a surplus allocation policy? Okay, back to this table then.
Move receipt.
Moved in seconds, receiving the report. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And then
Move staff recommendation.
moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Moving on to items, section 8. We have a Heritage Revitalization Agreement, HRA 00013, 2031 Runnymede Avenue. Mr. McStravick is online, is that, or is it, yeah, we'll use Mr. McStravick online for this, okay. Welcome, Mr. McStravick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Very good. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This next item relates to an HRA application that the district has received for the property located at 2031 Runnymede Avenue. I will avoid repeating what is contained in the report, which Council has received tonight, but the decision before Council is whether to give first and second readings to the HRA bylaw, which staff have drafted in response to previous Council direction. I would like to give one verbal update to a section of that report, however. In the section titled Response to Previous Council Direction, under Analysis, the second to last paragraph in that section notes that the applicants have not indicated whether they are willing to make a community amenity contribution in line with council policy. Since the time that this report was drafted, we have revisited our interpretation of this policy as staff and determined that the target CAC amount is $6,000 rather than $12,000 as noted in the report. And furthermore, I am able to report that the applicants have now indicated a willingness to make a CAC in line with the $6,000 policy target. I understand that the applicants, the owners, are in the room tonight, should council have any questions for them, and I will leave it with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is an opportunity for council to ask questions of staff or of the applicants, and then give direction. Just for clarification, because if this were to advance, no decisions being made tonight. This hasn't met the criteria to go have a public hearing, and that's where we'd seek public inputs on this particular item. So at this table today, we're just determining whether or not to move this forward. And there's some question there about, is there any additional context you wish to add to that, specifically around things such as the continued inclusion of the proposed secondary lot within the HRA or not, or within the heritage alteration, or as part of the heritage piece. So those questions in front of us. Are there any questions that staff or council has of staff on the application? Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks so much, and through you, Mayor, to staff. Thanks for the update on the community amenity, because that was definitely one of the things that I had flagged. But my question is, in actual fact, this lot has now been divided into 3 lots, because it was originally came to council in 2019 and had a lot subdivided off, and now it's still the same owners, and now they're, I think even at that time they had asked for an additional lot and we refused, and now they've come back for another lot. So would it not be that this has now been divided into 3 lots, so there should be 2 community amenity costs given to the proponent?
I'm not sure to give that to Mr. Mishravik or Mr. Green. It depends how far back you go on this as well, because I believe there's another 4 or 5 lots carved off the back of it as well in many years ago.
Different owners.
Different owners. Mr. Green?
Yeah, good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I guess it's important to recognise that in a HRA context, sort of the promise to retain the heritage is the amenity being offered. And so back in previously, whether it was 2019 or 2018, the amenity contribution at that point was to retain the heritage property and seek its designation, and therefore the entire HRA process is essentially a statutory authorised form of a community amenity contribution. I guess in this case, what we're saying and why we're seeking a CSC is that essentially the heritage amenity has already been designated, it's been protected and retained, and therefore we're now, and whilst the applicant is seeking an additional lot, we therefore think it's reasonable for council through its discretion to seek an amenity contribution through this process, subject to that being a voluntary contribution and subject to the applicants willing to pay that amount as well. And in this context, the applicant has mentioned that they are now willing to pay a $6,000 per lot / unit, which is what our policy, and I think our policy could be better worded, it could be made more clear, but that's our interpretation of our policy. That policy has also not been updated since 2019, but we believe that $6,000 per unit per lot, which is what the applicant's intent is to create an additional lot for a single family dwelling, that $6,000 is therefore appropriate.
Thank you, and so sorry, and I agree. I mean, the work that's been done on that house is great, and so I'm very happy with your answer as far as that goes. But I think I just heard you say $6,000 per unit per lot. So in this particular case, if it continues to be an HAP, then it would be one single family unit with the secondary suite. But if we took away the HAP, then it could actually be up to a 4-plex, which would then have $6,000 per unit. Is that correct? Am I hearing you correct on that?
I guess yes, that could be the case. I guess if if the designation doesn't apply to that new lot, then the SMU infill regulations would therefore apply, and therefore there could be up to 4 units on this new lot. However, we don't believe that is the applicant's intent at this stage. The applicant's intent has always been to build a single-family dwelling.
I think it's probably worth having the applicant come forward and just answer that question, because we want to make sure that whatever we're considering here, we're doing to achieve the outcome that's being asked of the applicant, not guessing. So why don't we just get that directly from Ms. Hillier? Welcome to the meeting. You just need to push the button in the middle. Actually, you should just state your name and municipality of residence for the record, and then you can just let us know sort of what the intent is for that piece of property in your application is what you want for that additional lot.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Ann Hillier. I live at 2031 Runnymede Avenue with Bruce Wilkin, who is the other applicant. So the question I understand is that you are looking for our intention in relation to the number of units that would be on the property. Just to put that in context, when we originally came with this application, the existing legislation didn't exist. And so our intention was to ask for subdivision of one single-family lot, because that's what we understood was available to us if you agreed to a second HRA. Since that time, I know that the legislation has changed, but our personal circumstances have changed, and our intention is not to build a house on the lot ourselves and to market the lot. And so we would be marketing as a 13,000 square foot lot, understanding that a purchaser of that property could bring an application to comply under the new legislation. We're not asking for that at the moment.
Okay, so at this point, it's really just the lot, and so it's really up to this council as to whether or not to put those restrictions on it, is how I would put that. But I think the choice that we have here is if we leave it within the HAP, then it goes through an HAP process, and then council would have a say as to what gets built on the lot. If it's removed, then it would essentially fall under the standard thing. I just want to make sure I'm clear that's confirmed. Mr. Green? Sorry, I had a side conversation here, so I make sure that we're 100% clear. The net effect of that, given the answer, is it's really at this council's table. If the lot is retained within the heritage area, then it would have to come back to this table for setting and design of any new building that would go on there. If it was removed, then it would essentially fall as a standard single-family lot, and the standard up to 4 units would apply as any sort of single-family lot. Previous single-family lot. Is that essentially how that falls down in terms of the removal and non-removal from the heritage? Correct. Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
You know, I guess there's always the option that the HRA agreement itself could be amended so that it sets out that it's the CSE contribution is $6,000 per unit in case more units are built on that lot down the road.
Ms. Hillier?
Thank you. The draft heritage revitalization agreement that would apply to the existing property that we own right now, which is where the heritage house is and the proposed new lot is a second heritage revitalization agreement. The original one would continue to apply to the existing house and the lot that was created in 2019. The HRA that is in your package is pretty close to the one that was placed on the property at 855 Runnymede Place, and that has a specific provision in it that building on that lot does not require a heritage alteration permit. And that language is reflected in both of the HRAs. Just so that you're perfectly clear that it wouldn't be, the land could be designated, continue to be designated heritage. That's the case of H855 Runnymede Place. The staff have included a couple of different options on page 7 of the staff report. Option 1 and option 2 reflect 2 opportunities to deal with the heritage designation of the land, but it doesn't apply to the house if that HRA is adopted.
Sure. Thank you,
Does that clarify that?
I think it helps, but just want to make sure that's staff's understanding as well of the scenario. I just want to make sure we're clear about if we move this forward, what is sort of as of right default approved, and what would require coming back to council for any kind of future approvals.
Your Worship, I can chime in. This is Kyle online again.
Yes, well-
Just to confirm what Anne just noted, Anne Hillier. The HRA draft that's before Council does include language to exempt the potentially newly created lot from requiring a heritage alteration permit in the future. And the reason it was drafted that way is because that lot will not itself contain any portion of the heritage house. Council has the further option, though, to direct staff to take the step of removing the heritage designation from the newly created lot as well, just to make everything completely clear in that sense. But yes, as Anne said, it has been drafted such that new home construction on that new lot would not require a heritage alteration permit.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Anything else, Councillor Braithwaite, in terms of questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of things. So I just want to be clear on then who is going to end up paying the community amenity charge, and will it be for a 1 unit, which is what is being suggested in the staff report for $6,000 per lot? But then what I've heard staff say, I think, is that if we don't have an HAP on this lot, and we allow up to 4 units, then we should be getting $6,000 a unit. So who then ends up paying that $6,000 a unit? Is it the proponent that's sitting here today, or is it the person who purchases that lot? And then therefore, does this proponent have to pay the $6,000, or does it wait until the purchaser of the lot purchases that lot to pay the $6,000 a unit? I know that's very confusing.
Mr. Green, I'll let you direct it to Mr. Stravik if you think that's appropriate.
Well, I'll start, but it depends on, because there's a couple of things at play. If council decides not to require a HAP, the land would still be designated. Therefore, that would limit the density to 1 single family dwelling and or a secondary suite or ADU. If the land is not designated, so council could direct staff to not designate that land, not require a HAP, but then that could potentially allow 4 units per lot on that site in the future. So it depends on the direction that council provides this evening to staff. So I guess there's 3 options. Council could direct us as is, as the HRA is presented here. That land would still be designated, but they wouldn't be subject to a HAP, but they would therefore only be limited to build 1 single family dwelling and or secondary suite ADU. However, if council directed us to remove the designation from that portion of the new lot, then in the future there could potentially be 4 units per lot. I hope that makes sense.
Sort of.
Because currently the designation applies to the entire property. Therefore, as it was therefore designated prior to SMOO legislation coming into effect on November the 30th, 2023, the land is essentially constrained in relation to not being SMOable, if that's a verb.
SMOable? Yes, very good.
And so only by removing that designation from that portion of the new lot would allow 4 units to be built on that lot. And therefore, if council directed us to remove the designation from that portion of the lot, somebody could come along and do 4 units, and therefore, in theory, then there could be an agreement in place that says that at building permit stage, or a section 219 place on title, that at building permit stage, a CAC of 6,000 per unit will be payable.
So just I'm going to go back to the applicant again. I just want to understand what the applicant wants to do so we can at least be considering that as part of our deliberation here today. So is the ask today to remove it so that the land is free? I appreciate there's no HAP required, it sounds like, but there is a, if left as with part of the thing, then it would restrict it to essentially a single family home plus suite model. Is the applicant's preference to have it essentially removed completely so that it falls under the SSMU, or is it, please go ahead.
Sorry. I want to say, first of all, I really appreciate Mr. Stravik's report and the thoroughness that he applied to taking us through the various scenarios. Unfortunately, we didn't see this report until Friday night, and so it's just over, and you've been closed since then, and so it's just over the course of this weekend with our own deliberations that we noticed the difference between option 1 and option 2. And option 1 would direct staff to remove the heritage designation bylaw from the proposed new lot so that it is available for the a small-scale multi-unit housing initiative. And because we are not wanting to go through that process ourselves, we want to sell the property because our personal situation determines that that's what we need to do. And so it's, I can't say we're indifferent, but I don't think that we have a strongly held position on removing it or leaving it on. It's our personal view that given where that lot is, it's more likely to be a single-family home developed there, just because of the nature of the neighborhood. But you can't preclude what might happen a few months from now. People are really interested in more housing, and it's a 13,000 plus square foot lot. And there's lots of examples of really, really good infill with more than one unit on those lots. So we would be marketing it on the basis that if somebody wanted to do something more under your new zoning requirements, that they would be responsible for bringing an application to you. It would not be us.
So I'm not sure I'm entirely, so at this point, there's no specific ask of this one. It could be either in or out from your perspective.
And the HRA is drafted on the basis that it would become a single lot. It's not drafted on the basis that it takes into account the options under this. It would be a new application to you under your new SSMUH. I'm not sure that's a good acronym.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so if council moves this forward as is, it essentially keeps the lot as a heritage piece and therefore has the same restrictions as the existing. If we wish to see that changed, either that can happen by a future applicant, future owner of that lot. They can make the application to say we still like to do that. That's something we could consider. Or we could change it at this point if given direction and direct it to staff to come back at the public hearing with those changes. We could actually, I think, probably minor enough in the sense that we could move that forward at this point with those changes if we saw fit. But right now the applicant is essentially asking it for it as it is, so let's just consider that as our primary piece. Makes sense.
It's my understanding from reading Mr. McStravick's report, is that he's wanting to give you the option of either encouraging the kind of multi-unit development there or not. You know, you have an opportunity as council to be able to take the heritage designation off the property at this point, which might lead to more interest in a multi-family development rather than a single-family development. It would signal to people that you're open to that.
Yeah. Back to this table. Are there other questions? Councillor Braithwaite? Questions? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor, to staff, I just wondered if you could outline the comparative process if this comprehensive lot under the HRA did not have a heritage building, was not a heritage lot, and it was simply a subdivision. Could you just outline for council what the potential costs and amenity equivalents would be if it was not a heritage property and it was a simple subdivision? Thank you.
Mr. Green, or should I give it to Mr. McStravick?
Okay, I can make a start, through your worship. Well, if it would have to be a rezoning application. CSC is not payable at a subdivision stage, so it would have to be for an applicant who is going through a rezoning application process. So the CSC policy basically says that through a rezoning process, an applicant will pay $6,000 per unit for a single family lot, for a duplex $4,500 per unit, or multifamily at $4,000 a unit. So it depends on what a applicant was seeking to rezone a property from and to, that would form the basis of the CSE contribution that the district will be seeking from the applicant.
Good. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. That perfectly sets me up for my question. So if we adopted option 1, this is a hypothetical, what would the zoning be of that lot if subdivided?
Mr. McStravick.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just flipping to the front page of my report because I can't recall if it's R4 or R5. It would maintain its base zoning,
It's
which I'm
RS4
scanning for.
currently.
It's R4, thank you. Yeah, so the zoning would remain unchanged.
And just to clarify, following up on that, we have changed all our zoning designations. So if it were, it actually gets the new identifier of R4, correct? So it's a completely bare lot R4. Thank you.
That is correct.
You? Just for my edification on that one, is it compliant with the current R4 in terms of frontage and size?
Through your worship, or yes, your worship, the lot that the applicants propose to create is compliant with the zoning. The HRA permission is only, they're only having to seek that because the lot has a heritage designation. So the subdivision of that lot requires this heritage approval.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Councillor Watson. Any other questions with the applicant or staff at this time? Okay, then because this is going to public hearing, if it moves forward, there's no public input. So really at this point, seeking direction on
Receipt.
Moved and seconded. That's pretty straightforward. Any discussion on receipt of report? Motion is to receive the report. We're just receiving the report this time, so not usually a debate. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed?
I'd like to move option 2.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. So just so we're absolutely clear on this one, so this is retaining the heritage designation of the new lot. So that would be option. Okay. So first, second, move it forward to HRA first, second reading and public hearing. Okay. Thank you.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
the reason that I chose option 2 is that it still moves it to public hearing, and then if the person who purchases that lot wants to have that removed, they can always come back to council, and so I think it protects us in a little way as far as that goes. I just feel more comfortable with option number 2.
Second, any just wish to speak to it, Councillor Green?
Very quickly, this is, first of all, I appreciate the owners being here tonight, and I appreciate the comments that they are not feeling strongly either way, so that makes our job a tiny bit easier. But also, this is a significant heritage property. The owners have invested a huge amount of time, effort, and money, I might add, into that property, and it really is a jewel in the neighborhood. There's no question about it. So I think to retain the heritage designation on the new lot is probably the wisest decision, which is why I'm supporting it, given the significance of the property entirely. Thank you.
Councillor Watson?
Yeah, thank you, and for the thoughtful comments about option 1 as a good way to move forward, going into public hearing. I have a slightly different.
Just for a second, the motion is option 2, correct?
Oh, sorry, option 2. Yes,
Option to
for
retain,
option 2,
so which is really
Yeah,
to retain
right,
the
right.
heritage designation. Yeah,
Sorry, I probably misspoke. I correct myself, and I do understand that. I have a slightly different take on it, and I see that since it's significant. The municipality is going to retain the significant designation of this house where all this magnificent work has been done. And so we hold that in our heritage stock. But in the intervening time, the whole planning framework has changed for not just Oak Bay, but the entire province. And there's an opportunity here for us to accept the new lot that will be created under the same permissions that will apply to any other R4 lot. And I think that we should accept that opportunity because it provides in yet another large lot an opportunity for more housing. And we have set up a framework for how that would be reviewed, and at least we've put the basic parameters on that. And I think that is the more forward-looking approach for the community at the moment, that we have an opportunity to, instead of 1 unit, get 4, potentially. It doesn't mean to say anybody has to act on that, but we should not stand in the way of allowing that to happen, given our housing mandate. So I would not be voting in support of option 1.
Thank you. Other discussion? Councillor Smart?
Thank you. I just echo the comments from Councillor Watson. I do agree it's an opportunity for more housing for our community, and I feel that the new lot itself, keeping the heritage restrictions on it is really just almost like a stopgap measure that's going to cause delays. And I see that this new lot should be free to have the same permissions that the other lots in our community have.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. And in addition to speaking against the motion on the floor, I think this is an interesting one. You know, I think that there's really a solid argument can be made for both of these options here, and I think that there's really pros and cons to both. When it comes to heritage, the management of heritage values, my approach has been to rely on the input of the experts retained to do this work and the folks that are specialists in this area. I remember at the discussion of the first subdivision and discussions about this property previously, the question of the significance of the property, the layout and the property itself and the lack of designation on the property has been at issue and has been a subject of a lot of discussion. So I'm actually pleased to see the supporting material from the heritage consultant here sort of specifically referencing that the landscape or the setting, not the setting on the lot, but the nature of the lot is in it itself not a defining element. And so my rationale or my conclusion then is that if that is then elected to not be a character defining, then the logical and most consistent way to treat these lots moving forward is to remove the heritage designation and treat it just like any other lot, as if it was, and have the same opportunities for building additional housing units on it. But clearly the lot, again, I can also see the obverse to that argument, because clearly the lot is a magnificent lot with a lot of mature landscaping that's had a lot of time and effort put into it, and the setting in its broadest sense does seem to be important as well. But this is more argument for consistency on my part rather than a non-recognition of the history of the lot. So not in support of option 2 at this time, Your Worship, but I can certainly see the rationale for it.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I won't support option 2, I think, and it's a very difficult decision on this one. I mean, there can be solid arguments for the rationale to do it or not. However, I think that the heritage home, heritage building, the owners of it have done an admirable job of revitalizing that property, and I think that given its the siting of the lot that it's on and the view that it is facing on, that heritage value will be protected, I think, and to encumber a new blank lot with constraints, rather than allowing potential development to meet community needs and the interests of whoever the new owner will be, are important. And I think that to encumber it with a heritage application permit requirement would, I don't think, serve the best value of the community. But I guess the downside to that is the community amenity contributions, because in a typical subdivision, you would know exactly what you were doing and you could do the calculations. And those monies do in fact help a community to provide for the future of residents in this community. And so there's the downside that we accept a lower value of a community amenity contribution. But this is what we've decided as a council is acceptable. So until that is changed, there's not much we can do to renegotiate that, because it would be unfair for a single applicant to be unfairly disadvantaged by this. So I won't support option 2 at this presentation. I prefer that we go with option 1 and not encumber the second lot.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. As the last person to speak, I just have one question to staff, and maybe it's to Mr. McStravick, but just for my clarification, if the heritage designation, if this motion passes, what is the process of a future owner of the lot seeking to go from the single family, which is the current designation, to multifamily? Is that a rezoning application? Is it a heritage revitalization agreement, or a HAP agreement? I heard HAP doesn't apply, so I'm curious about what is the actual process. So I'm just to get me a sense of how encumbered is this if option 2 passes versus going with option 1. Mr. Green?
Through your worship, it would essentially a report to council seeking to remove the heritage designation from that portion of the property, i.e. The new legal lot that will be created. So essentially, like a few weeks ago, council essentially repealed a heritage designation bylaw for 960 Farrell Bay Road. So it would be the same process as that staff would bring a council, asking if council wishes to remove a heritage designation bylaw from a certain part of a property.
Thank you. And just for, so within that then, neither the current agreement that's here 1 or 2 or that process would allow for siting and design consideration by council, correct? It's really just as if it was a single family or a or SSMU if that was the other aspect. But there's no setting and design controls at that point. Either way, that's out of the...
I could speak to that, Brian, if you like.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. McStravick.
Just to note that the one path I see where council could have a siting and design control over this would be if we removed from the HRA bylaw that clause which is exempting this newly created lot from the HAP mechanism. If an HAP was required for future construction on this lot, then that would be a mechanism through which council could regulate the form and character of the future development. But as has been discussed previously, outside of the Prospect Heritage Conservation Area, we lack relevant design guidelines against which to evaluate an HAP proposal until we adopt, for example, the national standards and guidelines for preservation of historic places. We wouldn't have much to go on when evaluating an HAP application for essentially a raw lot like this, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McStravick. I would probably argue that we would use those those guidelines as our guidance in the absence of other things, but I hear what you're saying is an internal process. So here's where I'm landing on this one, and it's a tricky one for me. When we had the discussion with the previous HRA, and the lot was carved off, the council agreed and approved basically no siting and design, and the argument at that time was it was really subservient to and behind the existing building, and it wasn't part of that. And in fact, that was why staff at the time recommended using that as a subdivision, because it was less impactful on the frontage on Runnymede and that sort of greenscape. So I think there's a case to be made here that this may perhaps have a bit more fingers in from our perspective. I'm not really convinced that that's necessary. I think I've heard from around this table that that's it. But I think there is an argument here that you could make a reasonable argument in this case where that because of the location of the ask right now, that this could have a slightly different process than has been done in the past. I do, having listened to my colleagues here, though, tend to fall back on we had this very lengthy discussion around the small-scale multi-unit process and how we wanted to proceed. We considered subclasses and other aspects of it in different ways, and we ultimately agreed that it felt best to just apply it broadly, and that was fair. And I think in this case, I tend to fall back to the same piece. I think at the end of the day, what would be on that site, I would feel more comfortable personally if we had some siting and design control over it. But that being said, I think that the the guidelines that we have for setbacks and the protections we have with the tree protection bylaws are sufficient. So I think I'm leaning now personally towards more of the, I think I'll probably still support option 2. I think that's a good model for us to go to, but it sounds like the people around the table here are leaning towards option 1. Which I'm fine with at the end of the day as well. But I think given the weighting of things, I'm probably still going to lean more towards option 2 that's being proposed right now. But that's my rationale. I think there is some case here for it, just given the location of this lot. That being said, I think I do hear the argument made very clearly that, and I think it's fair that the consistency and the message there is better to have. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just 3 points that I wanted to add. One is green space. I've been on this property a number of times over the years. The green space on this particular lot is critical. There are major trees. It is a very interesting piece of property. So I would be concerned about that aspect, that we have to be concerned about climate change and green space, and this really applies on this particular property. The second thing is that west of Blair Gowie, that right up Mount Joy to what would be Beach Drive, Fairfield Road, is, the character of the neighborhood is very much traditional and historical and heritage-like. We have talked about those values and how important they are in this particular neighborhood, and they have been for many years. And I guess my third point is the recommendation by the Heritage Commission. So those are just adding to my own rationale. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other discussion before I call the question? Councillor Watson and Smart.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I just want to say one more thing that has sort of been spurring on my own thinking about preferring option 1, and that comes from Dr. Kummer's report itself, where she actually gives us the history of what started out as a large lot and then became many smaller lots. So I don't really see this as being any more than that evolution continuing. And what happened on those smaller lots were really only regulated by very loose zoning bylaws at the time. So I don't think we're taking on any greater risks at all by accepting one more subdivision of what started out as a very large lot.
Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. I want to appreciate the topic of green space being brought up, because I think it's very important, and it definitely was something I was thinking about in looking at the options. And I guess I do have great comfort in the fact that when we put together this new legislation, our setbacks, besides the front yard setback being reduced, remained relatively the same, and so I don't think it's going to have a significant impact on green space, but I do appreciate the concerns that Council has raised. Thank you.
Go ahead. We don't usually actually hit the motions we don't take input from the applicant. So with that, we have the motion on the floor. So this is right now option 2 which is retaining the, as we all know what it is. Option 2 is the motion on the floor. So with that, I'm going to call the question. So a vote in favor of this retains heritage designation, just so we're clear. All those in favor and those opposed. I have Councillor Watson, Appleton, Smart, and Patterson opposed. That motion fails. I would suggest we put option 1 on the table. So moved and seconded. Thank you. I have Watson. You can feel free to motivate. We've had a pretty good discussion on this already. So
I will not go through my points again, but thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Just briefly, Your Worship, thank you. I would just sort of add, based on the discussion that we've had thus far, and I think it's been a good one, I would just add to that I think that it behooves Council to, I guess, not facilitate is not the right word, but to be as open and as engaged as possible into discussions about options for subdivision of large lots of this nature, and to entertain ways to make HRAs happen. We certainly have larger lots like this a number of larger lots like this in Oak Bay. We would like to see those heritage properties and those older houses enhanced. This is probably sort of one of the major examples in Oak Bay of an investment being in a house like that. So we would like to encourage those types of investments. We would like to see people entertain the idea of an HRA. So I think that in this particular case, if you know, I would like to see council communicate its interest in having people bring forward HRAs and to help facilitate that process to whatever way we can. So I see that as part of that process as well.
Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. Number one, I just want to thank the applicants again for the work that you have done on Blairgowrie. I think that you've done a fabulous job. I go by all the time on that road, and it's beautiful, and I thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think that I think it is forward-thinking, and I don't like to be accused of not being forward-thinking. I think it is forward-thinking for us to consider the streetscape of our streets. We are going to lose a lot with the new legislation that has come down as far as some of the character in our neighborhoods. We're going to gain a lot as well. I think that that's a great thing that we're going to be gaining densification. It's not that I'm against densification that I wanted option 2. It's because I was trying to think about what Blairgowrie will look like with a much larger building beside it. And how that might detract from the beautiful view that we have of Blairgowrie as we go down the street. So that's why I put option 2 on the table first, because I wanted to try that out to see if it would go. I will support option 1 because I think this deserves to go forward. But I'm saddened that we didn't hold that protection for the property. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other discussion. Ready to call the question? Oh, sorry, Councillor Green, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone's comments. I do want to make the point that, and I think this is a really important point, especially for Oak Bay, because we take quite a bit of heat at times about our position on housing, that we are working with this new legislation and we are doing the best, I think, in most cases that we can. So if someone is supporting, in this case particularly, and this is a unique case actually, I think, in some ways, if someone is supporting retaining the HRA or HAP, it's not because they're against multiple housing units. It's because the context of development and the context of neighborhoods is still important, I think, to a lot of people. And I think we have to put ourselves in that position. How would we feel with a 4-plex or a 6-plex next door to us on a heritage street? And this is kind of a heritage street. So I just want us to be careful that we don't label people as not supportive of multiple housing. That is not the case. I think we're just trying to work with the elements we have. And in this case, I think option 2 was a reasonable alternative. But I too will support option 1, again, for the same reasons that it should go forward. Thank you.
So I'm going to call the question. If this does pass, then we'll be moving, actually the staff report here is first and second reading, isn't it? And then direct to public hearing? Is that the, I mean, I could take it as read, but I think probably given that we're actually doing first and second reading of a bylaw, I should actually just have the mover and seconder more formally actually just say that give first and second reading to the bylaw and read out the bylaw. This is for option 1.
I can so move. I move that 2030 Runnymede Avenue Heritage Revitalization Agreement Authorization Bylaw number 4881, 2024 be given, you just want to do first reading?
First and second.
First and second reading.
Moved and seconded, same mover and seconder. We've had the debate, we're just doing it a bit more formally now. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And then that council directs staff to schedule a public hearing for 2031 Runnymede Avenue Heritage Revitalization Agreement Authorization Bylaw number 4881, 2024.
Same mover and seconder. Thank you. I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And that council directs staff to remove the heritage designation bylaw from title for the proposed new lot upon completion of the subdivision.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? I just want to throw out there, obviously there's no public input because we're going to seek that from the thing. I do anticipate we will hear from neighbors and thoughts on additional pieces on this one, but certainly appreciate the thoughtfulness given to the direction to move it forward at this time. So we'll see you at public hearing. Oh, sorry, Mr. Green?
Yeah, just one point of clarification therefore from council. Obviously early in the discussion there was the discussion around the CAC policy and whether it should be $6,000 per unit. Now that council has removed that designation by law, there is therefore the potential post-subdivision for more than one unit to now be built on that lot, and therefore whether council wishes to direct staff to amend the agreement, that the agreement says sets out the CAC contribution of $6,000 per unit, so that in the future it is crystal clear as to what that contribution is required based on the number of units being built on the lot.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I just want to make sure we can do that. If we're dividing the lot right now, are we able to establish a CSC under our policy per unit?
It's my legal understanding that we are able to secure amenity contributions through a HRA process, which is the same process as it would be for a rezoning application, and given that there is no amenity being sought from heritage, which is usually the amenity that is being sought.
Fair enough. And obviously, if you get legal opinion, that's not the case, and we'll come back to that in the future. So the motion you're seeking is to seek direction for the $6,000 community amenity contribution per unit for future development. Is that moved and seconded? All right. I do want to have debate on that because I think that's a piece. Is there any discussion? Councillor Smart?
Yeah, I can appreciate wanting to have amenity funding, but it doesn't sit right for me having subdivided this lot to in a sense give it less rights than the other lots in our neighborhood. So I won't be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Not seeing any other discussion. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Smart opposed. That carries. Anything else? Sorry, staff. I thank you for catching that before we left. Do we have any sense of when that public hearing is being? We're contemplating it. If not, if we can't say it this time, then that's okay. We'll leave it for now, but soon. Moving on to item number 7, bylaws and permits. This is subject to public input. This is our development variance permit for 0 Wessex Close, the fence along Wessex Close. We did receive some correspondence, which is somewhat related to this, and we have, I see some neighbors here as well, so we do anticipate some public input. Thank you very much to the applicants on the last application. Mr. Green, over to you to introduce, and then we'll, again, same process for people in the audience. We'll have questions from council, then we'll invite members of the public to come speak to us, and then we'll come back to this counter for consideration. Mr. Green, please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have nothing to add on this report other than obviously we received one piece of correspondence that is in council's agenda package, and the applicant is set next to me, and so is also able to answer any questions that council may have.
That's the introduction. Okay. Are there questions of members of council to staff? So this is really in front of us specifically just to allow for increase of height along that stretch. There's no other aspects of this agreement at this point that we're talking about. We're just talking about the fence height. So there's a default allowance for all owners along that stretch to have the height. Is that a fair assessment of what we're talking about?
Yes, yeah, the DVP would apply to those, essentially those 27 lots in that piece of public property. So essentially the DVP would be triggered as soon as somebody commences work on that fence, and so the DVP lies on title, and therefore there's no time limit as to when people may therefore replace the fence, as long as that DVP is action within 2 years, then that permit will be valid for forever, basically. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you for that. Can I just clarification on that? Does the development variance permit approved here run out? So if someone replaces their fence in 5 years, is the DVP stays on title.
It stays on title, so therefore it's valid as long as construction is substantially commenced within that 2-year period. So as long as somebody else has commenced that work within that 2-year period, the entire DVP would be valid for the entire lot.
Okay, interesting. All right, well, we'll have to make sure that happens. We can always extend it as well, of course. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to staff. My question was just with regards to the shortcut that goes over to Wessex. How wide is that shortcut, and would the additional fence height apply to both sides of that shortcut? And does staff have any safety concerns should there be high fences along that shortcut? Thank you.
We could probably ask the neighbors. I think there's actually higher fences there right now along that stretch. Yeah, they're sort of pre-existing in that little area. Maybe we can let staff have a look through their pieces, and I'm happy to go to the public here at this point and invite members of the public to come forward. Please come forward. You have to come forward to the desk. Just for a little historical interest, the desk sitting here is
Hi,
actually
if you're just
Tommy.
looking for the height of the fence along
Sure.
that corridor, it's, I'm a property owner on one side of that walkway. It's 7 feet to the highest point, part of that fence is 7 feet. So just to let you know. On the other side, it's probably a little bit lower because there's a big hedge there, and I don't think they wanted to take away more of the hedge to make the fence. That answers that question for you.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Please. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. And the only other question I had was just with regards to whether staff had any concerns about sort of setting a precedent where any backyard in Oak Bay has a fence along a public street, that potentially would they have an argument to be allowed this extra fence height? And is there any concern about how prevalent that might be in the aesthetics of streetscape? Thank you.
Mr. Green?
That's a very good question. I guess my answer to that would be obviously all height, or in theory, all fence heights, or so if somebody seeks to vary the fence height or to increase that fence height to 2 meters, they would need to come to council, and council would have discretion as to whether to approve that fence height or not. That being said, obviously there is a report later on the agenda about delegating minor variances to staff, which has certain criteria as to when staff would essentially determine a DVP application. If that application met those certain criteria and those certain guidelines, then that application would be supported by staff. Yeah, that would probably be my answer to that question.
Short answer is no. There's no precedent with the variance. You would have to go through a similar variance process, whether it's delegated or not, but some variance process. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, just one additional question then. Could staff just reiterate sort of the main incentive behind allowing for something in addition to our current fence regulations, which I believe, and you could correct me, would allow for 4.5 feet plus the 1.5 lattice, which is currently there in some places. Was the main reason to capture the one fence that already is this height? If staff could just elaborate on, or was it something that really the neighborhood had been asking for? If you could just clarify the sort of intent of the change. Thank you.
Mr. Green?
Well, I guess from staff's perspective, I think it's a reasonable ask to increase the fence height from the 4.5 feet to 6 feet, 1.37 meters to 2 meters, given the location adjacent to a busy road. And so, yeah, I guess staff feel like the application is supportable on that reason. I'm not sure if Mr. Robertson knows how many in that neighbourhood wish to seek that higher fence.
Mr. Robertson?
Thank you, through the mayor. Yeah, there were some questions from some of the neighbors about that. So we felt rather than individually having to do that, that we would do it as it's our strip of land there. We would do it consistently along there to allow for that. Given the rather unique setup of the property having two frontages and the rear one being on a busy road.
Good, thank you. Don't see other questions here, so I'm going to go to members of the public if you wish to come and talk to council about this item.
No, you go first.
I almost just said, well, if no one's going to come forward, I'll cut it off, but that wouldn't be very polite. So same process as you heard earlier, just your name and municipality. You don't have to give your address.
Yes, hi.
Welcome.
My name is Dr. Sean Jacobs, Wessex Close, Oak Bay. Hello, Your Worship and Council. I'm basically here because I want to just follow up on the last meeting when we were talking about the fence. This is related to the height of the fence, but it's also related to some other issues. I feel that there's more discussion that needs to be made with the fence along the Foul Bay Road, which is adjacent to Camosun College. I have 6 concerns, and these concerns came to me before my fence is going to be removed on November 25th. That's the letter I had here. So my 6 concerns, I'll briefly try to go through them, just highlight them. Number 1 is not being part of the solution. To date, I haven't spoken personally with any representative of the town concerning the fence. I have not received any feedback to the letter that I sent to council members voicing my personal concerns. Instead, I'm forced to accept the terms and the options dictated to me by the council, by the Community Building and Planning Association or people. So I would like to be more engaged in this. Safety-wise, another concern: removal of the fence will remove the barrier that I have. I just bought a new puppy. In addition, I have a disabled daughter that plays in the backyard with the dog. If the dog runs out with no fence, onto the busy Foul Bay Road, I can't be assured that my daughter's not going to run out and try to catch the puppy in traffic, and where that's going to lead to. The fence line also has a considerable amount of foot traffic along there, and removing the fence would encroach upon my personal safety and also, the general public safety of my property there. There have been thefts reported next door in the past couple of years. The third concern is privacy. Almost all property owners along the fence line, they've planted hedges for privacy. The fence height is approximately 4.5 feet, while the hedges in that area range from about 10 feet up to as high as 40 feet. These hedges were planted for privacy, so I think fence height is important for privacy. But even a 2-meter fence doesn't afford the privacy when a double-decker bus comes by and looks into your backyard while you're there. So I would ask that the height be increased beyond the 2 meters up to 8 feet, and not to propose 6.6 feet that you're proposing. So even an increase of that, and I was never asked my opinion as to what I thought the fence should be. Number 4 is noise. There's a significant amount of noise along this roadway. There's buses that are just behind these, runs right along here. Part of the strategy to reduce noise is to provide, a sound reduction fence, if you could, if you were putting up your own fence. The taller the fence is, the better you're going to have the reduction to the sound. Okay? In fact, a 7-foot fence probably wouldn't be very effective, so there would probably be no real way to significantly reduce the noise in that area. This is another one that relates to the property agreement, the right-of-way, and for example, it's the determination of my property line. So should I choose to build an accessory building in the future, I would want assurance from the town that the rear boundary of the property will be considered to be where the existing fence is. And if I sign a right-of-way agreement, there will be a discrepancy to where my actual property line is that I own and that of the fence. So what are you guys going to take as, I need to be a certain distance from my property boundary to escort something? This, in effect, is going to move any accessory building in more into my backyard, okay? And number 6, and I'm getting toward the end of this now, is that Oak Bay, what is the use of keeping the 1 meter strip of land? Like, I don't know what the plan is for that 1 meter strip of land, why the town would want to retain this land. It's far more valuable to the homeowners like myself that have a relatively shallow backyard. Even by offering this strip of land for sale to the property owners might be a suggestion. One of the options that should have been presented in the initial proposal should have been a way to return the property back to the owner, and that was never given as an option to council. If you think back to the initial sale of the property, there was really no reason to take the 1 meter strip of land, especially when we fast forward now and realize that the town failed in its duty to upkeep the fence, as they suggested that they would in the original part of that. So I don't see the whole reason for the town to keep the land. And then, Your Worship, at a previous meeting, you said that, you know, you guys were pretty disheartened that you couldn't do more for us, and you said that you'd like to do more, but you were limited by the finances because there was only a certain amount of money in a fund for the fence. So I've offered up some suggestions that would cost the town nothing, while you offload that responsibility of the fence to the residents of Wessex Close. So please consider amending the development variance permit to a height of 8 feet and recognition of the rear boundary of where the existing fence lies for the purposes of erecting accessory structures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn a couple of your comments into questions here as well, just so we can get clarification.
Okay.
You may want to stay there. Just for our clarification, these are all, I believe, are R4, R5 lots. So what is the setback requirements of an accessory building from the rear lot line? Go ahead, Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Mayor. 1.5 meters
Okay.
from the property line.
From the property line. So it would require, if this is on the fence piece, it would add half a foot or so of additional gap between the, if I'm understanding the reading correctly, because the fence would be outside of the current property line. So there would be a bit of an additional gap in that situation.
Yes, that's right, because the fence might be on the district's land, so that land is not taken into consideration for the siting of an accessory building. Thanks.
Okay, but it's not going from 0 to 6 inches, it's going from 1.5 meters to 1.6 meters or 1.7 meters, depending on where that fence is in that, or whatever that boundary is. Okay. I know I'm not going to ask questions around the why not selling, because I know we've had some of this debate already, but I think, I think we've had some questions here already about the balancing act of the appropriateness of height and so forth. Can staff, probably Mr. Robertson, can you share where we ended up on the 2 meter height? Like what ultimately drove that recommendation that's here in front of us now, that to reflect the existing height in those areas, as well as sort of a general balance of aesthetics? And I'm curious what actually was how that came about to be the final ask.
Yes, through the mayor. Looking at the reports shows the different heights of fences along there, just they vary a little bit, and wanting to have a consistent look around there. I can't say there was any more science that went into it than that.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have any of the questions that came out of the comments, so that's my piece. But I'm going to go to continue with public input at this point, and from anybody else. Yeah, we're good. Thank you. Other members of the public, please come forward. Welcome. Same process, just push the button, say your name, and what municipality you reside in.
Your Worship Council, my name is Sean Foster. I'm a lawyer at John Southward Law Firm Victoria, and I act at this point for Tim Felbell and Tony Joe, who are residents on Wessex Close. At this time, in the process of confirming the retainer of other residents on that street. So I'm here to make a submission at this point on behalf of Tony Joe and Tim Felbell, with the understanding that there may be more residents of that street who retain my firm. In brief, as I understand, we've been here for some time, and there's already been a great deal of deliberation over the fence at Wessex Close, bordering Foul Bay Road. What we're here to discuss tonight is the public variance permit. But that needs to be viewed in the context of how this matter has been before staff and before this council for some time, several years, as I understand it. In brief, echoing the comments made by the resident prior to me this evening, it's our view, and it's my client's view, that this process needs to be paused for a moment, and it may require further consideration. And let me outline why that is. First, the development, as has been alluded to, of this property was done in the 1980s. Oak Bay assumed the role of the developer and the seller of these properties. At the time the properties were sold in the 1980s, certain representations or marketing materials were made to the purchasers of those properties, and those representations included information about the fence that would be built and maintained by Oak Bay. If we look at the recommendation report of Ed Robertson from January 8th, 2024, which, as I understand it, precipitated the report that's before council today, we'll see that in that report, it stated that the district is under no obligation to repair the fence. The report acknowledges that the district has an obligation to repair the fence, but it states there's no obligation to replace. In my submission, that conclusion appears to be without any proper foundation. In my submission, there are issues that need to be decided with respect to the district's obligation to replace. Quite simply, if an authority has an obligation to repair something, but they take the position that they do not have an obligation to replace, they can simply ignore their repair obligations, let time pass to such a time where that structure needs replacement, and then say, well, we wash our hands of this, we don't have an obligation to replace. That, among other things, in my submission, requires further consideration. As we've seen in the report of Mr. Robertson, and we've talked about the finances this evening, when these properties were sold by Oak Bay at a significant profit, we see in Mr. Robertson's January 2024 report that there was a fund created that at that time had a value of $2.25 million. Those funds apparently were allocated for land development projects and other capital projects designed to augment land development projects. What we know from Mr. Robertson's report is that sometime in 2007 or 2008, a portion of that budget was then allocated specifically to an engineering budget for the Wessex fence. I understand that since 2007, at least as of January 2024, that fund that started at $20,000 is now worth at least $55,000 in that fund. So in my submission, there's a number of issues that need to be decided in terms of does council have an opportunity or an obligation to replace? That is going to affect, for my clients and a number of, in my submission, other residents on this street, what option they might take. These options that were proposed and voted on, as I understand it, at the January 2024 council meeting, were premised on this assumption that there's no obligation to replace. And in my submission, that needs to be considered more fully. It needs a proper review and assessment of those issues, and that's what I expect I'll be instructed to do on behalf of my clients. And so my submission today is that this matter be paused such that we're not going November 1st to a decision put to each member, to each landowner on Wessex Close to decide which of these options they want to do with respect to easements and so forth, until we've determined conclusively, until there's a vote, a decision, an informed decision on whether or not there's an obligation to replace. And council may vote and decide what to do with that at that time, but the premise of the January vote, in my view, requires reconsideration. I know we are short on time, subject to any questions. That concludes my statement at this time.
Ms. Williams? I mean, we can't address legal questions in an open meeting here, obviously, but thank you for raising the points that you're making. Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I was just simply going to raise a point of order on this particular topic. I believe if the Speaker intends to take the district to court on this matter, that the matter should be handled outside of the council chambers, and without legal advice, you would not be in a position to respond to his request tonight.
Thank you for that. I think we can just, there's some piece of clarification here I do want to get, and that's just related to, I got the report here open for me. What is the timeline that's underway right now, Mr. Robertson? I understand that there's options for the fences, for us to remove the fences at our cost. There's some deadline for that, I think, attached to it. And maybe just walk us through where we are in that. What is the process right now? If you're living on Wessex Close, what's happening behind your house at the moment?
Through you, Mayor. We've been in touch with the property owners for several months. We've done surveys of the properties to establish the location of the existing fence and trying to draw it to a conclusion of what each property owner wanted to do relative to council's decision earlier this year. We have no contractual timeline. We felt that if a decision was reached tonight, that given the information that's already been shared with the property owners, that would give sufficient time to indicate which route they would like to go of taking ownership of the existing fence, having us remove it, and building a new fence on the district strip of land there, or having their fence that they may have put up that is on our strip of land, on the district strip of land, formalized in an agreement. But we have nothing that ties us to that date.
There's been a couple of mentions of being required to remove their fence on sometime in November. Is that, can you just maybe clarify what that deadline is, if any?
Yes, the deadline was to get a decision on which route they wanted to take for the fence at the back of their property, and then the district would be removing the fences that needed to come down and then moving ahead with the agreements that need to be put in place for the remaining fences or new fences that were going to go up. And for any property owners who didn't wish to retain the fence or build a new fence but just wanted it open, then it would just be removing the fence.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And obviously, we're not tonight in front of us. We are looking at a variance DVP process, but appreciate that aspect. Was there anything else, Mr. Foster?
Your Worship, yes, just to respond to the comment from staff, just to be clear, I don't have instructions on behalf of any clients to commence litigation at this time. The request on behalf of my clients tonight is not dissimilar to that of the other resident that spoke, is that there needs to be further consultation, deliberation. My comments regarding obligations, those are for the district and council to make with their own legal advice, but I certainly do not have instructions to commence legal action at this time. This is simply a request to, for lack of a better word, put a pause on things. As we've heard, there's no timeline right now, such that no further decisions are made that can't be reversed until these matters are dealt with.
All right, thank you for that. Anybody else from members of the public wish to talk to council? I'm going to go to first-time speakers first. We usually just have people come forward one time. Anybody else here wish to speak to council on this particular item? Sorry, me. Mr. Jacobs, if you wish to come up for a second time and speak briefly, please do so.
Your Worship. Just looking at the first three letters on this, it says Wessex Close fence removal. And here are the key dates. November 1st, final decision are the words, to ensure you've communicated your decision by this date. And it just gives three options. So what if you choose that you don't want to sign a right-of-way agreement, but you still, if you don't sign the right-of-way agreement, that gives them the ability to go and do number one, which is just remove the fence without any consultation with you, because it's on the town land. So that's one thing, and that's what brought me here today. When I saw this, I said, this doesn't, it's going too fast. It's going way too fast. And the other thing is, as I alluded in one of my concerns previously, was that consultation. I haven't spoken to anybody from the town on this. Nobody has spoken to me personally and said, hey, what would you like to do here? Like, what about this? What about this? I haven't gotten that. All I've gotten is letters saying you have to do this, sign this, or else we're going to take the fence down. And taking the fence down in November is not going to be an option for me, because, like I mentioned, I've got things running around in my backyard that I don't want out on Falvey Road. So there's a lot more to this, and I think putting a pause on this and maybe having more consultation with the residents. And another big issue for me is where that property line is going to be for me. If I want to put something in my backyard, if my backyard is very narrow, is very shallow, so I don't want to have 3 feet or 1 meter or 1.5 meters, if that's what it is. That's 4.5 feet. That's a lot of room for me as a percentage of my backyard depth. So that's something that I would want to talk to them about and get a variance for that somehow.
Just procedurally, too, just so everybody's clear, I'm talking about variances or fence heights. There are variances available. You can apply for variances for things like setbacks as well. So if conditions, require you to have the tighter lot pieces to the sidelines, you can make that ask through a development variance process for that as well. Those are bylaws, but that is a separate process. That is a one-off, case-by-case basis. So
right.
We certainly had that in the past, where there's been unique situations where, for reasons like that, where there's a very shallow backyard, in a situation like this, that you can move those things, but those are the standard setbacks that come with all residential zones. Just
right.
That's just sharing information.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Robertson?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. This wouldn't change any setback. The property line for each property remains the same, and our 1 meter strip doesn't change. The measurement for offset would always have been from the property line of the property itself, not from our 1 meter back. So nothing changes there, just to clarify.
Thanks for that clarification. You can make a comment or question? Absolutely.
Yeah, well, like, answer me why, or try to help me understand why the town of Oak Bay wants that strip of land. What use is that going to be to the town of Oak Bay? Why did they take it in the beginning? Like, I know you had a fence on it, but why do you want to retain it now and not give it back to the property owner, or allow them some mechanism to get that back?
You can direct the questions through to me, sorry.
Yeah.
So just not to staff. It's not
Yeah,
staff's
okay.
decision.
Yeah, like,
we've had options come to us on that, I think, in the consideration, as I recall, but it's been almost a year since this process has been underway, so I appreciate the concerns about the rush, but we're trying to give a reasonable amount of time for decision making, but not in perpetuity, because we have to move forward on some of these things. At the end of the day, it did not seem like there's a universal thing of people wanting to buy those pieces of property. So for us to have a contiguous line available and maintaining the fence line where it exists right now, it seems simpler at no cost to the homeowner to be able to maintain the existing fence line, essentially giving that strip of land for free to the residents, right? That's essentially what's happening here. We're putting the fence on our property, allowing the residents to do that. So we're giving that extra space to the residents. And I think that was the rationale at the time, was just going through a process where we were forcing homeowners to buy that piece of property. While not a large amount of money, was probably still be in the tens of thousands of dollars, it seemed like a big ask for that strip for people. So that was my recollection of the debate that we had at the time, that it was quite an intentional decision not to sort of force people to sort of pony up cash at this point to buy the land. We thought, let's make it effectively the homeowners, but not cost them any money. So that was the driver for that decision. I hope that helps.
It does, but, and I'm just, last comment is this, that you're essentially giving it.
You need the microphone on.
If you're essentially giving it back to the homeowners, well, then the property line should go to the fence and not to where my boundary is. If that was the intent of what you're trying to do now, because we are taking the liability and replacing the fence and doing things as well. So it has to be a win-win, not all one-sided, which it seems like it is. And I think the fact that their legal action is being contemplated, that we feel as a group that we're probably being, it's very one-sided and not a balanced solution.
Appreciate you sharing that feeling. I know we certainly tried to find a balance here.
Point of order, Your
Go
Worship.
ahead, Councillor Appleton.
The speaker just mentioned that legal action was being contemplated. The legal representative just said the exact opposite. So can I get clarification on that?
I haven't spoken to a lawyer, just the fact that there is a lawyer here representing their interests. I'm thinking perhaps that's something that, in the fact that this is so one-sided, that would be my own personal conclusion. I don't have any knowledge of that.
Okay, we'll leave that alone then. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Appleton.
Yeah, Your Worship, that cannot be taken into consideration by council in terms of the matter before them, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. Any other members of the public wish to talk to council about this? Not online or in person, so I'm going to come back to this table. Just recognizing we have, I think there's, as we had before, a lot of discussion around some of this, the surreptitious. We have actually a request in front of us for variance. I'm not sure that the variance precludes any of the other pieces that are being talked about here, and I'm kind of contemplating, and perhaps Mr. Robertson, maybe I'll just ask this clarification question. And what's in front of us right now is a variance. It's basically just presets options to go higher than is normally legally allowed. It doesn't, I guess, stop any of the other points raised here from being points of discussion in future on these things. I just want to make sure we're just clear about what's in front of us tonight and whether or not, pausing this from council's perspective, it doesn't seem like that would help with the other pieces. It's just one step of the puzzle. So just for clarification, today is not approving a variance for that strip of land does not preclude any other changes to happen in future. If there's a will, the residents get together and decide they all want to buy the land and they bring that as a proposal to council. It doesn't preclude this from taking place. This is just one step that it's an enabling step here is how I read this. Mr. Robertson?
Yes, through the mayor, that's correct.
Yeah. Councillor Smart?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I just had a few clarifying questions based on some of the comments that just came through, and I really appreciate members of the public coming to share. One of the questions was just with regards to through you, Mayor, had staff considered an option where a resident could keep an existing fence for a little bit longer should they not be able to afford to build a new fence immediately? How unsafe is the existing fence, and is there an option in which a resident could keep the existing fence just a little bit longer? Thank you.
Go ahead. Ms. Robertson?
Yes, through the mayor. We're trying to draw the decision point to a close. We have been reaching out for a number of months to property owners with varying levels of success to get that kind of feedback. We would not take any fence down without negotiating directly with each property owner for their specific circumstance. So for instance, if it was not going to serve their purposes for us to take the fence down, for example, at the end of November, and they had a contractor who would come in and build them a fence in February, we would negotiate that so that we're working together and making sure that we're not leaving the back of a property exposed when they don't want it to be. We would also be looking at the integrity of the fence to make sure that we may have to do something temporarily just to shore it up in the meantime. But the plan is not to go in and just strip out all the fences and leave everybody to fend for themselves, but to work with each one for their particular circumstance.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. My second question was just with regards to the height of the fence. With the 6.6 foot proposed height of the fence, would that still, under our fence bylaw, entitle an owner to have the 1.5 foot trellis section above that, therefore resulting in an almost 8-foot high fence. Thank you.
I'll give it over to staff. Mr. Green?
Yeah, through the worship, through your worship, it's my understanding, reading the bylaw, that you can have a 1.5 feet trellis on top of that 2-meter high fence, subject to meeting some very detailed criteria as to the dimensions of that trellis.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, just one final question. I just wanted to confirm, it was my understanding that the location of the fence would identically mimic what is essentially there now with the wrap around the Gary oak trees at that one point, but essentially where it is now, and it wouldn't be moving significantly. And I just wanted to confirm my understanding of that. Thank you.
Mr. Robertson?
Through the mayor, yes, we've had the property lines and the existing fences surveyed so that they're within the 1 meter strip. We know that, other than that one variance around the oak tree. And the intent would be to replace in place, so there wouldn't be any movement one way or another, any significant movement.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks so much. And just going to some of the comments that were made by the members of the public, especially the one around no personal consultation. And I have heard staff say that there was a good effort made to contact each and every individual homeowner. So I wonder if staff could just touch base on that, on how many you weren't able to contact. And, you know, Mr. Jacobs said he had no personal consultation at all. And maybe if you can just have a comment on that, please.
Through the mayor, no, I don't have those figures with me. I know one of my staff does have that information. But I do know that they have tried to contact each property owner. There has been a series of letters going out, all with contact information on it. I don't believe there'd be any question as to who to contact and options to contact them for discussion about the fence. But I could not give you numbers exactly how many we have. So I'm sorry about that.
If I may, I think sometimes there's a difference between being reached out to in the sense of, like, I think the original comment was consultation piece of it. So I think some of the points being raised there was that given the decision that it drove the current process in January by council, those decisions, those kind of debates have not been continuing. So I think it's maybe in fairness to staff and to the applicant, they may both be correct on this one, that there's been reach out, but perhaps not the sense of consultation.
Thank you, Mayor. Even though I don't like being, I feel kind of threatened when a lawyer sits at a table and says that they're representing two clients in the audience. So I do feel a bit, I feel a bit threatened by that. But it also makes me a little bit angry when then I hear that there's nothing in the books yet, that they haven't really hired you. You're just there representing them because. And so that was very bothersome to me. But I did want to touch on something that you did say about the obligation to replace. And I wonder if staff could touch on what our obligation is to replace. So for example, if we chose to go all the way down that fence line and build our own fence on this side of the fences that are currently there, just, you know, within 6 inches of the fence line that's there, and just put our whole fence, a whole fence line up, could we do that? And what would the cost be prohibitive to do something like that?
Through the mayor, yes. Sorry.
Go ahead.
My apologies, Your Worship, just another point of order, that we're starting to enter into what could potentially be a defense case for litigation. We have been threatened this evening twice. So my suggestion is that we don't entertain this conversation related to the height of the fence.
Related to well, we have in their original report an estimation of $100,000 for removal and replacement for a fence, which was outside of the budget that we had for it. One of the drivers for the piece. because that helps with from a costing perspective. Are you okay, satisfied with that? I don't see other questions at this point. You know, what was in front of us today is, I just want to make sure I'm 100% clear on what's happening right now, just because my reading of and I can't remember if there's any amendments made, but I'm looking at the original report. There was essentially 4 different options. Basically, we could remove the existing fence and all the invasive species and just leave it open. So that's one option that the homeowners have. We can transfer ownership of the existing fence, so they can keep the fence that's there in perpetuity, and we'll just transfer ownership. Or we can coordinate and remove the existing fence and invasive species and allow installation of a new fence at their cost in the current fence location. And basically create a right-of-way agreement, because there's a number of fences that have been replaced. So those that have been replaced get to keep it where it is, located on district land with the right-of-way. Those are the 4 pillars of what was moved forward last time, as I recall. Did all of those go? Is that whole piece? I can't remember if there's any amendments made to that, Mr. Robertson.
Yes, through your mayor, that's correct. The only addition is that each fence that remains, whether it's the existing or a new one, they would all have an access agreement onto the district's 1 meter strip, which is part of the overall package.
Fair enough. And of course, and I think we had a discussion last time, if they wish to have them, they could have gates and so forth through those pieces as well.
That's correct.
Okay. So in front of us tonight is the question of the variance. So maybe bring that back to this key piece. I think we've heard, maybe we'll make some comments at the end of this piece of it attached to some of the next steps on the process. But for now, we have a report, we have a piece, we've had public input, we've had questions. I'm going to seek a motion to receive the report at this point.
Move receive.
Moved and seconded, so we'll get that out of the way, so it's formally receive it. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? And then I'm going to seek council direction on what next steps. Councillor Green, saw your hand first.
I'm sorry, I was just waiting for all of the dust to settle before I ask my question, and it's just a clarifying question. Under financial impact, and I just want to make sure I understand, by entering into an ROW agreement with adjacent property owners, the district will transfer the costs of construction, maintenance, and repair of any fence on the district-owned strip of land at 0 Wessex Close. So I just want to make sure I understand. So everything is transferred through an ROW so that we are no longer responsible for either maintenance or construction or anything like that. Is that correct? Is that my understanding? Is my understanding correct?
Mr. Robertson?
Through the mayor, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And that each applicant must pay an application fee of $1,750? No?
Through the mayor, no, that's myself as the applicant or our department.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Have added to the coffers of my colleagues over here, their department, for the application. But the cost, and this was part of the original report, the cost to do the legal surveys, to set up the agreements, is all done from the fund that we have established already. So the cost to the homeowners for this is nothing, and the district also pays for the removal where that's going to take place.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton?
I will move the staff recommendation, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. If this passes, it'll just create a permanent variance on that strip of thing. So whatever happens with the fences, there's the option of putting it up to 6.6 feet or 2 meters. So we're clear on what's the motion in front of us is. Any further discussion on this? I think before I call the question, I'm just going to ask the question of staff. We've heard some concerns here from neighbors about the timelines attached to this and so forth. Is there, I don't want to go into that too far, but we have no sort of context of reports or anything else attached to this tonight in terms of those pieces. What I've heard is there's still some ideas and concerns that some neighbors have. Staff obviously, we've given direction to try and wrap this up in some reasonable time frame. is just, I guess, you know what, I'll leave it for now. I just wanted to get some sense of where those timelines are sitting at, because I think the intention of this has always been to use all the money we have available for this to help fund this back end piece of it and to make it as seamless as possible, knowing it was never going to achieve all the goals of the residents. But I don't want this, I'm just going to get a sense of how flexible can we be in this process and still be somewhat cost effective in our requirements here of not sort of having it drag out for years, for instance, of managing this process. So, Mr. Robertson, how flexible are we in terms of some of these next steps? If you can answer that question tonight.
Yes, through your mayor. We are quite flexible. I would say the only limiting factor to that flexibility is the conditioned liability of the fence, in some areas worse than others, but that's the only I would say limiting factor in that flexibility. Other than that, it's a matter of staff being available to do the removals, but that would be it.
Okay. Thank you. So the question at hand right now is the variance piece of it. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Green opposed. That carries. That's our variance process for this. I think we may want some additional discussion on pieces, but it seems like the direction from council has been pretty clear on this one. I think staff have been trying to work, so I think to members who have attended here today, perhaps reach out with any other pieces of concern with, and just to work directly with staff at this point. If there's things that we can work on to move those forward. I understand there's still some discussion happening, obviously, as mentioned, for consideration if there's some more general approach. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. So if you guys decide to move forward with the fence, you're allowed to put a 6-foot-6 high now with this approval. The other piece of the process not being touched at this point. So thank you for coming out. Next, we have temporary enforcement waiver of anti-noise bylaw 3210. Mr. Green, probably the more simple of the last two items.
Yeah, Your Worship, this is essentially a noise exemption request to not enforce our anti-noise bylaw in relation to some construction dates and times that the applicant is seeking. Nothing further to add other than in my report I do note in the IAP2 framework engagement about council could choose to ask the applicant to notify the adjacent business owners of the proposed work schedule, and just to inform council that has already been actioned by the applicant. The applicant has essentially engaged the adjacent businesses and informed them of this proposed work schedule and this request that's coming to council this evening. So I also believe that the applicant is also here to answer any questions that council may have.
Your patience is noted, sir. Thank you for sticking around.
And so, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Being cognizant of the time, are there any questions of council for the staff or the applicant? Don't see any. Any members of the public wish to talk to us about this matter? You're welcome to. You probably don't have to if you're the applicant. If there's no questions, I think we're probably going to get to a vote pretty quickly on this one. Not seeing any questions.
Move receipt. Oh.
Yeah, I had the motion here, so move to receive. I'll take the mover and seconder, and then go ahead, Councillor Green. We can before I call the question.
I was a little late here. Just on this request, I see that it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the noise provisions. I'm just wondering, are there any residences? I'm assuming there are residences above some of the buildings. There aren't any?
Not this building.
Okay, but the bell block isn't that far away, is it? No, so I'm just concerned about residents in the bell block, potentially, the impacts on them. But I understand this is for a limited period, so it's not horrendous, but thank you.
Okay. It's already been moved in a second. I haven't called the question on receipt yet, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Now is probably the appropriate time for that comment, but is there anything else anybody wishes to make comments on this motion? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just to follow up that comment through you to staff, do you know if anyone followed up with any of the residents in the Bell Block, or at least made them aware of what might be happening? I think you talked about notification. And were there any comments back from residents at all with any concerns? Thank you.
So yeah, so that was the applicants who did that communication with those adjacent residents' businesses. I'm not sure if the applicant has any comments as to whether he received any responses back from any of those residents with any concerns or comments. Nope. Nothing was received back.
For the record, because you weren't mic'd, there was no feedback back according to the applicant. Okay.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you. Not seeing any other. I'm just gonna make a comment here. I actually really appreciate this process, which is trying to be, appreciate that there's the rules and then there's the reasonableness of being flexible for those rules given the limitations. So I know it's a bit of a cumbersome process to go through these asks, but I think it's nice that we were able to have these kind of things come to us and have a process that we're not so beholden to the bylaws that we can't get around them when it makes sense to do so. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. That's it. Thank you very much. And good luck with the project. Yeah. We have the last item of business here tonight, which may or may not take time, just cognizant of the fact it's 10 to 10. But let's get to the overview. Mr. Green, I believe, is back in your court to provide an introduction.
Yeah, Your Worship, this is a report that follows up on a staff report and council direction from March the 11th of this year, where council directed us to draft an amendment bylaw to the Development Applications Procedure Bylaw, which will have the effect of delegating approval of minor development variance permit applications to staff. The report that council received in March had slightly different criteria and guidelines in that report to what is in front of you today, and that's probably for two reasons. One, on June the 24th, council adopted essentially the infill small-scale multi-unit housing regulations and made amendments to our zoning bylaw, and also council also made changes to its parking facilities bylaw. And so as a result of those changes, as well as a review by legal counsel, the criteria and the guidelines have changed slightly from what was originally presented to council on March the 11th. Also, in terms of just some analysis today in relation to how many development variance permits we have received in 2024. So in 2024, we received about, I think it's 10 development variance permits. Of those 10 development variance permits, 2 of those would have been delegated to staff under this criterion guidelines. One for 3142 Woodburn Close, which was a second story setback from 3.3 metres to 2.7 metres. And then also the fence bylaw DVP would have also been one that could have been delegated to staff if these criteria and guidelines would have been in place. So 2 out of the 10 would have been delegated to staff based on 2024 DVP applications received. Happy to know. Yeah, this sort of concludes my sort of brief intro really in terms of the changes that have been made since March 11th, and happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Sure. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I just had one question. I was just wondering why minor lot coverage variances were not included. For example, if somebody wanted to avoid blasting and therefore needed a bit more lot coverage, or if they wanted to build around existing site trees and they needed a bit more, why was the minor variances and lot coverage not included? Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Green.
And so, yes, since the March 11th, because there was also a direction on March the 11th to consider minor variances to lot width as well, and both lot width and lot coverage are not variances that can be delegated to staff under the legislation, given that the legislation talks about minor variances to buildings and structures and not to the size dimensions of a lot.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Smart? Mr. Green?
Through you to Mr. Green, thank you very much for the report. Just for clarification and for the purposes of discussion, can you define minor variance for me? I'd appreciate just a little clarity on the word minor. Thank you.
Through your worship, well, the criteria in the bylaw essentially determine what is minor. So we've determined that if you meet those criteria, then that application would be considered minor. So every municipality is taking a different interpretation of what they consider to be minor. And so if council wishes to change the definition of or include additional criteria or increase those criteria, that would also then still be considered minor. But that's essentially how minor is defined. It's not defined in any shape or form in relation to the LGA. It's for each municipality to determine what they consider to be a minor variance, subject to making sure that it doesn't affect lot width or lot area or lot coverage.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's the other hand. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite. Questions?
Actually, it's more of a comment, so I don't know if you want me to wait.
Just wait a second. I'm just going to ask a quick question on the under the guidelines. It has sort of, consider the following guidelines in deciding whether to issue a development variance permit. There's if the proposed variance is necessary to address a constraint, and then if there's a community or environmental benefit in granting the variance. It doesn't say whether those are and or. Is that either of those two criteria allow it to qualify, or is they have to meet both those criteria for it to be considered by staff? Oh, good. I came up with a stumpy one at the very end of the night when it's hard to think.
A critical and there. Well, ultimately, it's up to council whether if council believes it should be an and community and environmental, or one or the other, I guess, ultimately.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. And then I guess the other question I have is just on these, I think the question that was asked of what is minor is a really good question. And I was, contemplating some of these numbers. I think any one probably is, but if there was multiple of these, they would probably quickly become less than minor in the overall scheme of things. So I'm just kind of curious in terms of obviously there's been a lot of thought put into this, but sort of a largely just a 25% as a default for all of these, either consideration of, a smaller amount or a varying amount depending on what it is. I mean, there's a little bit roof or building heights is 10%, but most of it's 25%. I'm just curious if there was, and if there's like a limited number of these that could be contemplated in the consideration of a minor variance. And Mr. Green?
Well, ultimately, it's how you, as I mentioned earlier, it's how you define that criteria. City Victoria, a few weeks ago, they are now defining minor variance of any project up to 2.5 FSR is considered a minor variance if it's in relation to missing middle. So it's how you wish to define minor.
Okay, well, that always makes it harder to make decisions, especially if we're going through a long list of potential numbers. I do need to extend the meeting if we want to have this debate, though, so
I'll extend the meeting till 10:15.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Does people wish to take just a 1 minute stand up and stretch moment? Yes? Okay. I'm going to just recess for 1 or 2 minutes. Just stretch your legs. I'm not sure I can actually stand up, but I'll try. Okay, meeting has been extended by 15 minutes. We all had a chance just to stretch our legs for a second to help make our minds clear and have a quicker debate. Councillor Braithwaite, you had the floor.
Thanks so much. Your question actually made me think even more, like how minor, so if we have 4 minor things on an application, does that then make it major? Is it 2 minors make it major? Because so I'm really struggling with that because I don't want to, I think that more than 1 minor adjustment would then to me should make it have to come back to council.
Okay.
And so maybe how many minor does it take to have it to come back to council?
How many minor variances to screw in a light bulb? I think this is the question that we have. Yeah, no, I think that's sort of the question we have here tonight as to where we feel comfort. And you know, for the record, this is one that we asked staff to go away and come back with an option on. If there's what I would appreciate tonight is a discussion. And if we want to kind of give some general direction, come back with some other options, we can do that. If there's general feeling that the things are laid out here, we can do that. But it's not one of these ones where if we don't resolve it tonight, it's got a time, constraint or something like that. We just want to get these minor delegations done to kind of relieve some of the workload.
So then I'm going to go into the thought that I had, and that is that I feel I'm not sure that I want to deal with this now, and the reason for that is because we've had so much of our authority taken away from us in the past year. In regards to things that come to us and things that we can actually make decisions on, that I'm struggling to let even more power go. And I'll use the word power. I don't really mean power, but I mean more authority go from us. Because I think that our community is struggling with some of the rules and regulations that are now in place, and they utilize us as council to be able to come and talk to about variances or what they would like to see or things like that. And I think when we give even just small, minor variance capability over to staff, then it takes it out of that realm for us to be able to deal with the public. So I'm really struggling. So I'm going to be really interested to hear what everybody else's thoughts are on this around the table, and whether or not we should, take a pause on this and think about it and then come back to it in a couple of months. I'm not sure.
Thank you. I'm happy to throw my 2 cents in behind this one. Personally, I mean, I think obviously I always think it's best if we can advance business when we have the opportunity. Secondarily, I think that where I see a lot of the value of this is frankly in existing buildings where they might want to be doing work. And so not necessarily for new builds, but for existing buildings that are trying to do things, and we can reduce the timeline and the complexity and cost for those applicants. So I think there's value here. I think for my thought is really the question more of, really what are if we can move it forward, what should those constraints be? And I think, I think philosophically, we set the minor variances as more minor, i.e. a smaller percentage than is being laid out here, or do we leave them the same, or do we look at constraints in terms of cumulative, like maybe no more than 2 of these in any one application could be considered minor. So those are some options we have to kind of contemplate. But I personally, I think we should always make the effort to move things forward if we can. But if we can't, I think again there's no harm in us giving some direction and having it come back to us. I had Councillor Smart, Watson, and Green. Sorry.
No, thank you. I just to express how I'm feeling. I guess I'm very much in favor of the report as written. I also do feel very strongly that if we do move this forward, I would want to see it for existing as well as new buildings. And I just wanted to explain that, I guess from a design perspective, there's often things on the site that can cause minor variances that I think staff could very easily interpret the benefit of allowing for a minor variance on a new building to save trees, to reduce blasting, etc. So I would not want to put any limitations on how many minor variances, because often projects with minor variances are due to an existing site situation that exasperates many things at the same time. And so I feel like it would really reduce the effectiveness of having such a policy to put those kind of constraints on it.
Thank you. Councillor Watson and Green.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I have a question still about this, and then just a comment on something in the drafting. And so this would be my, if I could, my question to Director Bowl. We have been sort of having this discussion about how many minors makes a major. What happens at the Board of Variance right now? Are there any restrictions on there, like they have to be able to respond to hardship? Are there any limits on the number of variances they can grant in a single application?
Through the Mayor, no, we are not aware of any limitations in that sense. It will all be considered through that lens of what is the hardship and what are the conditions that lead to it. Thank you.
Thank you, that's helpful in my thinking. And then I want to just make a comment about something, this may not go anywhere tonight, but in the drafting of the proposed variance allowances for fence height, we just have a little grammar problem. It says the proposed variance is no greater than 25% of the maximum permitted fence height. And then I think it needs to say, and the overall fence height may not exceed 2 meters, because right now the precedent, the antecedent is variance. So the proposed variance, blah, blah, blah. And it's not that the variance cannot be greater than 2 meters, it's that the overall fence height can't be greater than 2 meters. I think that's what's intended. So I just wanted to flag that as a little drafting issue.
Love grammar nerds.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sorry. So if I could just follow up with a comment then. I think given that I sort of share Councillor Smart's view about this, that certainly if we have a board right now who can look at the overall situation and take multiple things into consideration for hardship, that we should be able to grant our own staff for the kinds of parameters that are set out here to do the same kind of review, to really, and the purpose of this was to allow things to move more smoothly and create fewer kind of bureaucratic barriers for things which kind of make sense in an overall context of a house or even multiple dwellings on a site. So I would be in favor of moving this forward now.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. I have a question and then just a few comments. Under financial impact, it states that reducing the DVP application from 1750 to 1250 to reflect the reduction of staff time required to process an application. And then it says that there will be a reduction in revenues. Does staff, through you, Mayor, have any concerns, either Mr. Bowl or Mr. Green or both? Do you have any concerns about the overall potential for reduction in revenue and how that might impact the department or the municipality? Thank you.
Mr. Bowl.
Yeah, through the Mayor, not really a concern there because these fees would be adjusted based on the estimated staff resources needed. And that's why the reduced fee is proposed for these delegated variances, because they don't need to go to council, and so there's a savings there in processing time for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you taking comments now, or?
You know what, I'll take comments right now because I think it would help guide some of the conversation, but I also just want to point out that the numbers that we're talking about here do seem to be fairly small, 5 or 6, maybe 10 applications, so that even if there's 10 applications, if there's a $500 difference, we're looking at $5,000 less revenue, so it's not, just want to put this in some
No, I
context.
I realize that.
Thank you. Please go ahead with comments.
Okay, thank you. I am empathetic to Councillor Braithwaite's comments. I think if we are going to proceed, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I am saying that we need to communicate this clearly to our community, because many of our residents still believe that we hold quite a bit of responsibility for the development and the planning of this community. And I think we have to be really clear about what we don't do as opposed to what we do. And so if we're going to devolve some of that responsibility to staff, I think we need to be clear about the fact that that's going to happen and why. So I do appreciate the views of Councillor Braithwaite and others, of course. And by the same token, I don't want to impede the progress around development. But I think there is a concern on the part of the community that they have lost a voice in the process of development. So I think we just want to be really clear when we communicate these kinds of changes. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And, it was only when I looked at the cumulative review of these that it did start to twig on me that, well, if all of these are issued, it's not so minor anymore. And while I respect what Councillor Smart has relayed, I also am concerned that if this becomes an easy process, and developers understand that, I think it won't take long for them to be asking for these variances on many of the applications, in which case then it just becomes part of our design guidelines for housing. And so I think that therein lies the complexity of this, and certainly perhaps something like a fence and the setbacks as a variance are fine, but if you then do the building height, you continue on. So I think there has to be some limiting criteria for how many of these are granted to any single application. And I'm not certain that I have enough, certainly not as much knowledge as staff at determining the best way to do that, but I would like to see a limit on certainly the number of these that could come forward in one application.
Thank you for that comment. So we are into comments as well as questions at this point, and that's fine because I think we have a complicated piece, and I think those are thoughtful aspects. Councillor Appleton? I didn't first. Oh, I do have you on my list, and my apologies. I skipped over you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I appreciate these comments. I guess I take a slightly different view of, I think, maybe trying to get at the same problem. I see it in the sense that we're mandated to fulfill this, the SSMUH legislation. There's no choice there. We're going to be implementing that, and that's going to be coming before. I guess I see it from the perspective of we need to streamline as much as possible, such that council and staff aren't having to entertain a large number of variances when that process kicks in, and we start having uptake on that process. There's the potential for a lot more variances in the future. Councillor Patterson's comments and Councillor Braithwaite's comments, I appreciate those just in terms of the design element of things. I think this, for me, goes beyond the topic of, I'm not sure that we get the level of oversight or the level of control that's being contemplated or potentially discussed here exclusively with the minor variances piece. To me, that's more of a form and character discussion, a DPA design, or a design discussion. If we really wanted to engage in that type of conversation, for me, it's done through that type of mechanism. And we have the ability as council to revisit design standards for SSMUH, provided that we're meeting the standards, so that we can revisit that in the future. I'm not sure whether getting really fine-grained with the minor variance piece gets us potentially to that goal, but I think that it could potentially cost staff and council a substantive amount of time to entertain a bunch of minor variances when we get uptake on that infill housing component. That's a potential outcome that I can see.
So before we go to second house speakers, I think I have heard from everybody on the list here. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite. You're going to have to make a motion to extend for another 15 minutes, just for the record, because we're not going to get to this in the next minute.
I was actually going to, okay, I'll move and make a motion to extend to 10:30.
Seconded. I do want to cap it at 10:30 tonight, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Please continue.
Thanks. I'm really interested in hearing the comments of everybody around here, because maybe what I would like is I would like a chance to go and look at this again now, and because I hear what my colleagues are saying, and maybe I'm just reading it in a different way. And so I'd like the chance to go back and have another look at it, because maybe I'm reading too much into it and just being too nervous about what the power that we're giving away. So I wouldn't mind going and have another look, having another look, perhaps looking at a couple of things and making slight changes, and perhaps maybe staff can come back to us and say how many minors do make a major, or something like that. So that I would really appreciate the opportunity to have this come back to us at another time, so that I can have another look at it and really read it more in depth, is what I would ask my colleagues to allow.
Procedurally here, I'm going to turn to staff. Okay, when people say they want to do something, I always like sort of suggesting that a motion to follow that if you want to do it. So the motion to refer it to a future meeting, is that, or defer it? I always get it wrong on these ones. Yeah, Ms. Plouffe?
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. It would be a motion to defer.
To defer the matter to a future meeting.
So if, with the indulgence of my colleagues, I would like to make a motion to defer to a future meeting.
Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. I can't remember if we can debate deferral. I think we can debate the deferral. Is that correct? Okay. So I think you've already motivated. Seconder, wish to add anything to the motion's on the floor for deferral to a future meeting. Do you wish to add anything to that? You seconded the motion, no? Okay. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Worship. I can appreciate where this is coming from, but this is just a deferral to a future meeting for consider. So there was some discussion of potentially asking for, staff, of staff outlining options for potentially how, major, how cumulative impact, those types of things. What I hear from the motion that's on the floor is just referring forward. So I didn't hear any further direction to staff in that motion.
Sorry, I thought that I would make the deferral motion first and then make the motion after that. I didn't know if you wanted it all together.
Oh, Lordy, it's too late at night to come up with procedural things. No, I think a deferral motion is really just a deferral motion. I don't think we can add caveats to that. It is, the whole matter would just be referred, or deferred. Ms. Plouffe, just for clarification.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. You can defer and for future information, absolutely.
Okay.
For additional information, yeah.
Okay. So the motion right now is just to defer. If you wish to amend that to specific additional information, you can do so. I think just be very clear about what the ask is so that we can debate that amendment.
And I may need help with this because my colleagues may ask for a couple of things. But the main thing for me would be the number of minor variances that would be acceptable for an application. That would be the major one that I would be looking at.
So basically asking staff to come back with recommendations on or options for capping them, the total number of
Yes.
variances
Yeah.
to be considered within a minor variance application.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's the only piece of information you're just wish to come back? Okay.
Well, I mean, I think that, again, somebody has to second that, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Okay, yeah. So right now we're dealing with an amendment to the deferral, which is to include a request for that additional information back from staff. Okay. So any debate on that amendment? Go ahead, Councillor Green, and then Councillor Appleton.
I think it's always healthy to have as much discussion as possible on issues like this when we don't really know the full implications. And the landscape has changed a lot since June when we looked at this in the beginning. So I think it's important to at least have the time to process it. It gives Councillor Braithwaite and others a chance perhaps to follow up with staff if necessary and for more clarity. But it is a fairly... It's not a minor proposal, but it does have major impacts on our community ultimately. So I think I always think it's valuable if we can take the time to look at it in more detail.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of corporate services chatter going on there. Are we still okay with the motion? Okay, just want to make sure that we're not offside on that. So right now we're talking about the amendment to just ask staff to include some options or recommendations around capping the total number of variances to be included in the minor. Whether or not this deferral happens or not, of course, is another question. But Councillor Appleton, did I see you want to speak? Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. Although I appreciate the intent that it's presented, and I'm not going to support the amendment, mostly because I believe that, I'm not sure what new information staff's going to really return to us, because I think staff is going to say back to council, it's really to council's discretion to make a governance decision as to what, because we control what constitutes minor, because the minor is whatever we say it is in the bylaw. So therefore, we can also say that X number of cumulative impacts is the line we're going to draw. So I'm sure that staff will have, cogent and important things to say back about that, but ultimately it's going to be a governance decision from this group to say, we think this is what constitutes a line, or this is where the line should be drawn. So certainly I can appreciate, time being taken to ruminate on the decision and potentially get more information from staff, but I'm not sure that staff has a lot of, and I don't mean to speak for staff, but I don't think staff has a lot of recommendations to say this is, what council might decide as far as setting a threshold.
Thank you. On the amendment, Councillor Smart and then Brett Patterson.
Yeah, thank you. I also won't be supporting the amendment, and mainly because of the really great guidelines that have been written and attached to this proposal, which really give the context in which these minor variances will be considered. I really feel like the report is very clear, and agree with Councillor Appleton that I struggle to see what extra valuable information will come back. I think we just need to make the hard decision. And looking at the guidelines that are written right at the end of the report, I do feel quite confident in staff's ability to make the right choices.
Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I certainly understand the remarks by Councillor Appleton and Councillor Smart, and to a certain degree I agree with that. What would be very helpful if we refer this to a future meeting and it comes back is on the final page, just before the options, under number 2, says the director must not issue a development variance permit if, in their opinion, the proposed variance would result in inappropriate development of the site, adversely affect the natural environment, or substantially affect the use and enjoyment of adjacent land. I may interpret that one way, but I would like a little more clarification as to what that means, how that's viewed in the planning department. When you say substantially affect the use and enjoyment of the adjacent land, define substantial. Like how do they work through that process and determine those things? It's not, it's certainly number 1 above there. There's more explanations, but number 2, it is not explained. And I think having that information would at least give me a greater understanding of how they're reviewing this.
Thank you. We have the motion for amendment on the floor. I'm going to just speak. Generally, I think I will support the motion to amend. I think I wouldn't mind just some thought. Go away and think a little bit about this. And if staff have come back and say, actually, there's looking at cases and things, if there's a, what would be reasonable. I don't want to set a limit that's so low that it makes it unworkable, and I think makes some sense to have some upper constraint on this, so there's a comfort from the public as well that the minors are minor. So I'll support the amendment, and at the end of the day, it's up to us, and I think this really is a risk tolerance decision, not a technical decision. But I'm going to ask for brief comments from Councillor Braithwaite. And then
I just wanted to clarify, I never once said that I didn't think staff could make the right choices. So I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, fair enough. We're late. We're probably going to say the wrong things occasionally. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Just wondered if it was possible just to, through you, Mayor, to ask a question to staff if they felt like they could really further define substantially affect the use and enjoyment of the adjacent land, because that seems like a really challenging thing to define. Like, are we actually giving them some scope that they can respond to?
So the motion on the floor right now is just to amend them to come back with options around the other piece. So right now, I'm going to roll that question out of order just because we're not actually asking them to do that work. This motion is just to add some feedback in terms of if they have recommendations or observations on the limiting of the number of these pieces. So I'm going to call a question on that amendment piece, which is, okay, all those in favor of the amendment? And those opposed, Councillor Smart and Appleton opposed. That does carry. So now I have an amended motion to defer with this. We have 4 minutes, and if there's any additional comments, I think we're not, we've given some specific direction, but I think this conversation probably helps staff, because I think we're going to come back this next time. We'll probably be, they'll probably have a chance to think about some of the questions being asked and may have some better answers. I appreciate you raising that question to make sure that we're clearly defining some of those terms. Is there any other comments here that we want to make sure that we have as part of the conversation, so staff have a chance to think about things before we come back in case there is a question raised at the next meeting? Not seeing any. I'll just leave it as a comment here, and I do think we have an obligation to move it forward. I'm fine with the deferral. I do think that my natural inclination is to be a bit more cautious on these things and being very clear these are minor, and if we need to scale them up, it's reasonably easy to do. But I appreciate that is ultimately a risk conversation that I think the broader wisdom of the party of the council here will help us achieve. I do appreciate the discussion that happened here because it's raised some interesting points I hadn't thought of. I also think that we really are at the end of the day, we have one of the side effects if we have too many variances going at the minor level. We may not see that we've just implemented substantive changes to our zoning bylaws. If those zoning bylaws are not meeting the needs and they're being dealt with at kind of at a constant churn of variances at the application level, we're probably not doing our job well either, right? So this threshold has two halves of it that we want to make sure that we do want to delegate a minor, but we don't want to miss out on the fact that there may be some actual changes to our zoning that we may want to contemplate. So there's multiple aspects of this. I just appreciate the conversation. Motion right now is for deferral with the one amendment. Any other discussion on the deferral motion before I call the question? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? 2 opposed, Councillor Smart and Appleton. But that will come back to a future meeting. Thank you for that. That is the conclusion of our scheduled agenda. Is there any new business? Any motions to adjourn?
Adjournment.
Oh, there we go. Lots of those. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you, everyone. And look forward to that. Thank you.